Can you? Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. Hope you can hear me. I need to hunt people that are not muted. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just to check if you can hear me, those that are tuned in or connected online, can I have just someone commenting or greeting?
Can hear you now.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. The time is 10, and we would like to honor and keep time, especially, I need to minimize this. You don't want to see this, right? Okay, let's stop the share. Then at least you can see who you're talking to. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all on this very special day. May we ask all of you that are connected online to please mute your microphones. We know you are home, some are in the office. We wouldn't like to hear the sound in the background, hubby or lovey or sweetie calling you, or the children calling you, or the sound of the kettle when you're preparing your coffee. My name is Victor Sibeko. I'm the current PRISA president and the moderator for this program this morning. So a few house rules. PRISA president. Did I say the president? Oh. That's very wishful. The PRISA current chief executive officer. Correction. Oh my goodness. Once a president, always a president. I know Madam Cass is going to honor me for this. Okay. On a very special morning when we're talking about something very important, it is important for us to lay the house rules quickly. I've introduced myself as Victor Sibeko, PRISA Chief Executive Officer, not President. I'll also be moderating this session today. Few house rules. Those of you that are connected online, please mute your microphones. To those of us that are in here, you've got your laptops with you. You can just mute your volume. We are running a hybrid session. We've got guests and delegates in attendance, and we've got you attending online. So while it is an important thing for us to respect the COVID-19 protocols, please be advised, especially to those that are in attendance in person, that the venue is authorized to host event, and it is compliant in terms of ensuring that we all had our temperature taken. We have completed the guest register. We've got our masks on. I've got my mask on. I had it on. I've just took it off because I'm far away from the delegates that are attending in person. So we're here today to share something very, very, very important and interesting in regarding measurement and evaluation. And we are proud to be doing this together with AMEC. One thing that we need to clear with you as well is that the Measurement Month is part of the Global Education Program by AMEC, an international association for the measurement and evaluation of communication. Now in its 8th year, traditionally it's held, the Measurement Month is held in November, It is the most well-known global program to educate the public relations communication industry about best practices in public relations measurement. Measurement Month is not only voluntarily run by members all around the world with AMEC membership in about 86 countries, but it is also widely supported by the biggest public relations association in the world, including PRCA, IPR, ECO, Global Alliance, and PRISA NEDA, doing the right thing. So as such, ladies and gentlemen, PRISA supports this global initiative by AMEC and urges the members to look out for AMEC and PRISA events to follow on social media using this platform. And we are very grateful that this have been made possible by Brand South Africa, who is part of will be forming part of the presentation. But to welcome us officially to this event is none other than the President of PRISA, Madam President Kesaji Nayaga. I will hand over to her to do the official welcome before we get started with with today's deliberations. Over to you, Kes.
Thank you. Very good morning and welcome to this masterclass on measurement and evaluation. I'm honored to have the privilege to welcome you and to open the session, which I'm sure is going to be really thought-provoking. It is a great honor to introduce you to our renowned speakers today, Dr. Petros de Kock, who is GM for Research at Brand SA, and Mr. Francois van Dijk, who heads up operations at ORNICO, a brand intelligence research company. Now, Dr. de Kock has extensive experience as a political analyst, having lectured in political science and international relations in South Africa and the US. He also has been a guest lecturer and speaker at various conferences and seminars. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of the North, a master's cum laude in political science from the University of Pretoria, a honors degree in international politics, and a BA in political science, both of which have been studied at the University of Pretoria. Mr. van Dijk has studied and taught public relations in the early 1990s and has worked in some challenging corporate communications environments during South Africa's transition to democracy. Being passionate about advertising, journalism, and PR, he joined ORNICO in 2002. He is responsible for advertising, editorial, and social media monitoring and analysis. He is also a board director at the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. Now, as Victor has mentioned, this is the largest PR and communication measurement organization with membership in some 86 countries. He also serves on the Measurement Council for the IAB in South Africa, and he regularly writes articles where he discusses issues ranging from PR to measurement and evaluation best practices. He has been a speaker on communication measurement and marketing in South Africa, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Thailand, Spain, the Czech Republic, Namibia, Botswana, Kenya, and Nigeria. So as you can see, we are in really good hands today. Our moderator is Associate Professor Renee Delian Bienacher. She is also the immediate past president of PRISA and a senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. Our convener is Mr. Victor Sibeko. He is also the CEO of PRISA. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor has also mentioned that this masterclass has been made possible by partnership amongst ORNICO, the University of Johannesburg, Brand SA, and PRISA. The timing for this webinar could not be more opportune. Driving into work this morning, I was thinking to myself, what better example of a communication campaign than the COVID-19 campaign? The lives of people around the world depend on governments' abilities to effectively communicate with its citizens. And the measure of success for these COVID-19 campaigns, sadly, is life or death. And the other really prominent example is perhaps the recent presidential elections in the not so United States of America. Seldom do we consider that these election campaigns are fundamentally communication campaigns. The success or the failure of these campaigns determine who wins or who loses in the battle for the top job. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Victor again. Welcome, and I hope that you will find this master engaging and useful, and I thank you very much for this opportunity. Victor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for the warm welcome and the word of welcome to our speakers today and acknowledgement of the sponsors. I just have to do this. Attending in person is the PRISA past president, Madam President Dalian Rene Bianake, of whom which you will see later on. And we also have the pleasure of the presence of the PRISA Limpopo region attending in person all the way from Polokwane. And this is a good sign of commitment, Madam Puti Mutapo. Right? Yeah, big round of applause for Puti. Okay. And also acknowledge the presence of Madam Pumeza Treza from Brand SA, who's been on our side and supporting all the PRISA initiatives and all other partnerships that we have. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just hope that we've got the good doctor connected already. Pumi, can you assist check, because there's so many people here. I need to navigate through the screens to see who's here now. It's looking very good. And to those of you that might find yourself on the run or moving around, we are also live on PRISA Facebook. You're more than welcome to go to the PRISA Facebook and follow us and attend this masterclass. You can also make comments. We will, from time to time, go to that page to find your comments. The president has actually touched on who the Dr. Dr. Francis, Dr. Petrus, okay. Sorry, but is already given us a brief resume of Dr. Petrus. We will allow him to get started with his presentation, but I've got the presentation on my side and I am going to do the driving. Okay. Right, Dr. Petrus, if you're ready, over to you, sir.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I've also tried to share from my side so you can say what is the most convenient. I also have it, just you can tell me if you can see from my screen.
Oh, okay. Let me stop mine and let's see if we can pick up yours.
Can you see? Should I call it up again?
Oh, yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, President and Facilitator and PRISA colleagues. I believe a few weeks ago, my two colleagues from the research unit, our manager Shamiso and our researcher Zahira, also shared some of our work. So thanks to Pumeza for maintaining the relationship for us with PRISA. And I think to connect to something that the President indicated in the opening remarks, we live in incredibly complex times when it comes to the profession of communication, broadly speaking, but then in very specific terms, if one think of public relations can be a very good thing, but it can also be a very dangerous thing. One only needs to think of cases like Oxford Analytica, or in the South African case, Bell Pottinger. There's some very difficult examples one has to deal with. But the reason I raise that is that we must always be mindful that when we engage with questions of monitoring, evaluation, communication effectiveness, that whole realm of activities, that does not happen in a vacuum. It happens within a context, meaning as an organization, as a communicator, as a business, one has certain communication objectives. You want to measure and find, are you effective with that? But oftentimes, we also need to ask, are we communicating the right thing to the right audience? what is the angle or the pitch or the aim of that particular piece of communication. So it's a very multi-layered cake that we need to cut as communicators. So what I decided to share today is to take you a bit into the world of Brand South Africa in terms of and maybe just for some background, I cannot assume that everybody knows what Brand South Africa is or what we do. So just by virtue of background, Brand South Africa, we are located in the presidency, so we're a public entity established as a trust deed with the major purpose of marketing the South African nation brand and communicating on the brand of the nation in relation to things like investor attractiveness, the reputation of the country, what we offer the world as a nation in terms of trade, in terms of our people, our culture, the full spectrum of who we are as a nation. If you want an image of what the nation brand is and how it differs from a corporate brand, think of it this way. South Africa, from the Limpopo River in the north all the way south to Cape Point, from the east, from the hot Indian Ocean to the cold Atlantic Ocean in the west, all the people, all the mines, all the schools, all the institutions, everything that this country can offer is in a way needs to find a way to be reflected in the brand of the nation. So it's a very comprehensive and a very inclusive, one would say, theoretical construct that one has to work with. And that's when you also need to start thinking in a very specific way about how you communicate from that brand position of a nation brand. How that differs from a corporate brand. A corporate brand is typically something that's for sale. A nation brand is not for sale. A corporate brand is also a much more specific and focused. Let's say, for example, a VW or Mercedes-Benz as a global brand. Yes, it is a massive global brand. However, you've got a single line of control and sight over that brand, meaning if a reputation crisis emerges, you can, as a communicator or as a PR specialist, step into a monolithic brand construct to help communicate on how is the company dealing with the crisis. In the case of a nation brand, it's something completely different. And I'm going to give you two practical examples that I've experienced myself in the years that I've been in Brand SA. You wake up on a morning and you find Oscar Pistorius had killed his girlfriend. A major reputation crisis for the nation, a major reputation crisis for the criminal justice system, for our media profile in the world. So as Brand South Africa, in those times, we did a tremendous amount of work of interfacing directly with foreign correspondents, media, etc., to share knowledge, to interface with them in terms of what is the reality of South Africa's system. Another case, for example, that comes to mind is the Marikana. When the Marikana crisis hit the country those years, it was also a tremendous reputation challenge that we faced, but you really need a concerted and a very well designed effort oftentimes to deal with those kind of things. So I'm just sharing that for broad background. So our work as Brand SA is quite comprehensive in that way. And what you see on the screen is just some elements that I'm going to share with you. But before I go into the detail, I will say what is not in the presentation. What is not in the presentation in terms of the discourse, current discourse of monitoring and measurement, I think it's things that's very familiar to us in the era of social media. As an organization, all of our campaigns, all of our marketing and other initiatives, we measure things like your social media reach, your impact, etc., your following. So we do a lot of assessment of our specific context in terms of what was the reach, what was the impact of that, what was the engagement levels with that on social media platforms. So that we definitely cover, and I'll speak a bit more on that as we go. But what you will see in the slides is very much directly linked to our research work, our domestic perceptions research as an organization. And just for background on that system that we've developed for the nation brand. Firstly, as a nation brand organization, we really need to understand what is the mindset of South Africans? What is our identity? How does it find expression? What are the things that South Africans are concerned about the country? What are the things that South Africans feel strong and positive about the country? Because all of those things in our mind space, in our identity expression, ultimately play a role on shaping the brand. So in the domestic perceptions research, then, what we've got 4 legs of the research. Firstly, we do, and actually we are currently in field with our annual national Omnibus survey. It's a fully nationally representative sample of 2,500 respondents, from the smallest rural community to the biggest metro, age-wise, race-wise. We have a fully representative sample. Then, in addition to that, we run monthly online and mobile surveys with about 350 respondents per month, which gives us a more tactical, on a month-to-month basis, insight into dynamics in society. I'll share some examples of that with you later on. Then a bit of social media monitoring, just to provide context, background for what are the debates, what are the discussions, what are the themes emerging in the social media space. And then on the qualitative side, we've got focus groups as well as in-depth interviews. So that bigger picture then tells you that we've got a very strong quantitative as well as a qualitative dimension to the research that we did. However, when we opened this project, what we did is, when you monitor for the country, basically that's what we are doing. In a way, we are monitoring for the nation brand organization, and we need to monitor this at a very extensive national scale level. Now, one of the interesting things that happened with the project is we launched it in 2017, and then in 2018, we took a paper to the annual Southern African Market Research Association conference. Because what we did is we developed a segmentation model, a very different and a very unique segmentation model for the South African society. And we won 2 awards in 2018 for that specific research. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, what I'm trying to say here immediately, for communications professionals, people in the marketing, public relations world, a segmentation of audiences, a segmentation of a community, or whoever is your communication target, is ultimately a very important tool to have access to. So the intention of building this segmentation model was very much to provide a national level platform for us to understand our society in a new way, and to understand it in very unique ways that haven't existed so far. And we got some confirmation of that. We, in fact, this year also, we published a peer-reviewed academic journal article in Politicon, published by UNISA, that's in the political science world. Now, on the slide here, this is some examples of what we extract from our national survey. And I think you will probably comment that this looks very different to your usual kind of stuff you see in the communications world. But because of the fact that we need to keep a finger on the national pulse of what's happening in the national mindset, in our study, we developed 3 major indices. First is for national pride, second is for active citizenship, and the third one is on social cohesion. Now, each one of these indices is based on roughly 25 to about 35 statements. So in the national pride construct, you will find roughly 25 statements building up to your index score. The same with active citizenship. So these are very in-depth, very detailed indices that we built. Now, the timeline that you see there, this goes from 2017 all the way through to most recent reading at September of this year. You will see a major trend emerge that our first reading for this project 2017, we had a score of 74 out of 100 for national pride, which goes down to 64 as of September 2020. So there's a very definite weakening of that. And coincidentally, the weakest point of pride you find coinciding with lockdown level 5 and 4 this year. Similar thing happens with active citizenship, also a weakening of that over time, with a low point coinciding with lockdown levels 5 and 4. Social cohesion, also a similar trend over time, a weakening from 72.5. As I said, that's a score out of 100 to 61.6. Now, why do we see that happening, and why is it important for us to monitor this as an organization? Firstly, we do see that weakening of the economic outlook and recessionary dynamics from 2017. We are well familiar with the economic challenges that the country has been facing before the COVID pandemic already. Several quarters where we would be skirting on the edges, basically, of recession. Now, that had a direct impact on all those indicators of social cohesion, pride, as well as active citizenship. Another major driving factor of the weakening of those things is dwindling trust in political leaders and government, unethical behavior. But all of this, in a way, translates into citizens withdrawing from society because of economic hardship, because of challenges in communities. People then, in a way, start withdrawing. So now, why do I tell you that big picture story? As a nation brand organization that need to understand what's happening in the national mood, to be empathetic, to have empathy towards the situation in the country, to manage the brand to the best of our ability, to maintain momentum in terms of our belief, or basically our faith in the construct of the country. So that is then also linked to a whole host of other things that we monitor. But I thought I will share that at the very high level of some of the work that we do to, in a way, monitor the broader situation, to monitor what's happening in the mind space of South Africa, and to then, as based on things like our segmentation model, our behavior groups, to design interventions on that. Now, seeing that we are talking about monitoring, evaluation, etc., I thought I will share some very specific data also from our national study to take colleagues into the kitchen, as it were, to now show, okay, we do monitor the big picture stuff. We look at your social cohesion, your pride, your trust in society and government, etc., etc. However, now, as an organization, we of course also have our own campaigns, our own strategies, etc. Now, how do we measure those? And what do the numbers tell us? So the first one I'm going to show you is basically from our national survey. There's four major pillars, in a way, of our work that we measure through the national survey. The first one would be awareness of Brand South Africa as an organization. So we need to understand, in the national bigger picture scheme of things, how aware are respondents to our survey of Brand South Africa. Now you can see 2017, we were at the 38% awareness, which grows to 49% by 2019. Now, we also then test the payoff line, or the brand image, the South Africa inspiring new ways. And maybe just for background, for some colleagues from the communication industry who's maybe not all that attuned to the history of Brand South Africa, I'm just going to pause for a moment. Brand South Africa was created in 2002 as the International Marketing Council. So this happened in the first administration of President Mbeki. The movers behind that was President Mbeki himself, Dr. Eso Pahad at the time. Joel Netsitenze played a major role in bringing the idea to the fore and establishing the International Marketing Council as the dedicated entity to market and position South Africa globally. And there was a very interesting reason for that. The reason for that is South Africa made the transition to democracy in '94. We had the Mandela presidency. We were the wonder of the world. However, people still had very practical questions about the country. Can we travel there? Can we invest there? Can we do things? So the IMC at the time was created with the goal of establishing a singular brand identity for the country, both domestically and abroad. Now, 2012, we then implement the new positioning of the country behind the inspiring new ways positioning, as you see there. So from 2017 at a national level, the awareness of the national payoff line basically increases from 32 to 61%, which is quite a healthy improvement there. Another one, which is a major drive of the organization, is our Play Your Part campaign. Some of the colleagues may be aware of this, a very diverse set of activations that we do, either in person with communities or online. We've had it on television, on SABC, as a television series over time. So you can also see awareness of that at about 46% as of last year. And another one of our key programs is our constitutional awareness campaign, where you can see it retreated slightly over time, but that's also due to a reallocation of resources. So what is the other message here? An internal and reallocation of resources also shows the effect of that. So the story behind these numbers is then, in terms of the bigger picture of monitoring, evaluating the work of the organization, the big picture of awareness is very important for us. Then maybe just further detail, we can show then in our data, we can trend it by month, literally, where we can show moving levels of awareness. And it's interesting if you do an exercise then, when you go back into our plans, if you go back into what we implemented around the Play Your Part campaign, you can see the correlation between movements of awareness and what it is that we are doing at a given point in time in the public space around the Play Your Part initiative. Now, also what we then look at, okay, so fine, we see national awareness at a certain level, we see a certain level of engagement with our programs and our initiatives. Now, what are the platforms? And television clearly, as you can see on the slide, still stands head and shoulders above the rest as a major driver in South Africa of awareness of these initiatives that we run. Then second come in social media, or above the line, your billboard, your online kind of media space. That is the second one. Then radio comes in very strong. And of course, we know the media industry has been turned not only on its head, but inside out, the evolution of the digital realm. So newspapers are ever dwindling slice of the media pie. And then lastly is your word of mouth. And interestingly enough, the strongest word of mouth is on our constitutional awareness campaign. There, for example, if you go onto the Brand South Africa YouTube page, you will find some AVs we did with a local film director called Imran Christian, a really impactful constitutional awareness intervention that we did with him. And please go and watch some of these pieces because they really tell a story. And I think the word of mouth is very much driven in that specific case of constitutional awareness on the personal impact of those short snippets of stories we tell in our constitutional awareness audiovisual material. And then also deeper data breakdown. As you can see, I'm not going to bore you with all the numbers, but this is in the context of the masterclass of the work of PRISA, just to take you into that confidence of saying then, okay, so how does Brand South Africa awareness then break down at a national level according to race, according to age, according to rural, urban, metro, employed, unemployed, etc. And the similar applies to then inspiring new ways, Play Your Part, and all those key initiatives that we have as an organization. Now, in terms of broader media engagement, this does not speak now, it doesn't speak specifically just to Brand South Africa, but it does speak to broader media engagement in the public space. And you can clearly see as SABC channels 1, 2, and 3, see at 68% is still the lion's share of the South African public that engage with those television platforms as a primary source of entertainment, information, news, etc., etc. Then ETV, then your DSTV constructs come in quite strongly as well, and then it goes much lower into your community media, etc. Then when you go to the right-hand side of the screen, when you start looking at WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, etc., those just give numbers of our respondents, of course, now, of our sample universe. It gives you a breakdown of online engagement of citizens on those kind of platforms. Now, this is, of course, also important information for us because, as I will show you later on when we get to our segmentation model thinking, this kind of media consumption pattern becomes important intelligence ultimately to use when one plan to select and target specific audiences. Also, once again, not numbers I'm going to bore you with, but just to show you then the deeper breakdown of your engagement with your SABC platforms, your DSTV platforms, WhatsApp, Facebook, and then of course a huge portion with no social media or no social media activity. Now, just for detail on the National Omnibus Survey, I included just the boilerplate of the information of the study, the sample 2,500, multi-stage stratified random design, a margin of error with a confidence level at about 95%, which is quite strong. So that's just the nuts and bolts of the study. Now, another element then that I spoke to earlier is our monthly surveys, which is a very nice tool for us to have as an organization. In this monthly survey, we carry a bank of standard questions for tracking purposes over time. However, we've got flexibility that as new issues come into the public domain or we need insight on certain issues, we can introduce new questions. Now, of course, with the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sorry to say for these months, all our available flexible space in the survey has been occupied by questions on COVID. So from April of this year, we included several statements to test public response to the COVID pandemic, interventions by government to contain the pandemic, and how um, to contain the pandemic. We also, so what we then did is in terms of the monthly survey is then to go to look at trust in government, how do people perceive social distancing, do they practice it, etc. And I'm just going to talk you through a few quick trends we saw, and we're happy to share more detailed data if anybody is interested. We saw something very interesting between April to about July. That was still lockdown level 5 and 4. Between those months, confidence, for example, in the National Coronavirus Command Council dropped quite significantly. Also, general trust in government ability to contain the pandemic also dropped. However, and this is a bit of on a lighter note, by August, when we went to level 3 and 2, and ultimately the opening of the ban on the sale of tobacco and alcohol products, suddenly it turned around, and confidence in government, confidence in the National Coronavirus Command Council also went up again. So that was quite predictable. But anyway, so the release of tobacco and cigarettes, alcohol and cigarettes basically played a positive role in shaping perception of government. So you see, on our monthly survey level, also we can track kind of public perception and responses to specific things. Now, not just, this is not quantitative, but just for background information, we also run focus groups on a variety of themes where we really need to dig deeper. Currently, we're involved with a project with the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. They are working on a social economy project, developing deeper insight into how one engages with the social economy in South Africa. So in our Omnibus survey this year, we introduced a whole bank of questions on the social economy. And maybe just to quickly give you a background to that, that would entail things like cooperatives, stokvels, non-profit organizations, etc. And we're trying to understand what is the economic role, the socio-economic role of stokvels, cooperatives, etc., in our economy. Because oftentimes we talk about the formal sector versus the informal sector. But that big church of the informal sector hides a lot of activity that's oftentimes structured, that's not necessarily institutionalized in a corporate sense, but that plays a major role in supporting either job creation or supporting societal activities for development purposes. So this is a very interesting piece of work we are currently doing with the DTI, and we expect to have the results of this early in the year, and we will release that information probably around March. So PRISA, a heads up, there's something interesting coming our way by early next year in terms of that work on the social economy. Now, I think one of the most interesting, oops, sorry, I must click on this screen. I'm on another screen now. There you go. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the behavior groups and then basically our segmentation model that we developed as part of the study. This is a major innovation on segmentation research thinking. And I'm just going to pause there for a moment. Typical segmentation models would rest on a demographic legs, meaning you would look at your population from an age, income, geographic distribution, and ownership point of view. Now that means you understand a certain component of your society according to where do they live, and to be crude in terms of LSM measurements, do you own a vacuum cleaner or a fridge? What kind of car do you drive? What is your average income? What is your race? What is your home language? those are important demographic indicators, but then those then typically get massaged in a way to provide a certain form of segmentation. And we said basically that's okay to have that, but that tells you nothing about the actual person. Let me give you an example. Think of your organizations, your families, whatever network of communities you work in. Let's say you're in a company, you're at a certain managerial level, you will find in the parking lot of the company, typically Mercedes Benzes, VWs, cars like that. Now, okay, fine. All of you may drive similar kinds of cars. You may fall into a similar kind of a segment according to ownership pattern, age level, etc. But are you the same person? Definitely not. Is your behavior, you may drive a BMW and the other guy drives a BMW, but your behavior, your attitude as a person is completely different. So what we said is, let's see if we can segment society according to our behaviors, according to our predisposition towards society. So our segmentation model that we then ultimately developed is based on analysis of the three indices that we have in the study. So the data from the Pride Index, Social Cohesion Index, and Active Citizenship Index becomes the pool of data that we then analyze to extrapolate the behavior groups from. So to cut the long story short, let me start telling you then about the behavior groups. So basically, this year on our website, you will be able to access a series that we are doing every month. We are releasing a short description and an infographic of the specific behavior groups. You're more than welcome to engage with that and also engage with us if you want more info. But basically, if you look at the second bullet point on the screen, it's to gain deeper insight into the behavior, attitudes, and values of South Africans, and to find how these shape we are as a nation. Of course, we are shaped by our demographics, but more so than anything else, we are shaped by our behaviors, by our attitude, by our values. Now, we've got about 6,000 research records per year. That is the basis for, I think, a lot of this very comprehensive analysis that we do. An important feature of the groups highlights that who we are as a nation can only be understood as an outcome of tremendous underlying diversity. This is something fascinating that we always talk about as South Africans, about our diversity, the unique features of our nation. But you know, one thing that stands out very clear in the research that we do, when you look at the 10 behavior groups that we have, and I'll show them to you in a moment, there is not a single one of those groups where a race group or an age group or a something dominates. It's really interesting when you look at the 10 behavior groups that we have, how much South Africans have in common, regardless of the race they have or the class status they have or whatever. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, this is just some examples of the infographics that we are releasing currently as part of our series, and I would really encourage you to engage with this, because we're really seeing it also as a conversation with our stakeholders. So we're really trying to share the crux of these different behavior groups. And if we go to the next slide, then you will get a picture of the 10 groups as a whole. So firstly, the 10 groups, as I indicated, in terms of the data, it is linked to the indices of pride, social cohesion, and active citizenship. We do a lot of statistical analysis on that, which then brings to the fore these behavior groups. So we have the independent humanists, the concerned citizens, the uncritical loyalists, the celebrators of achievement, the positive enablers, the accountability advocates, the cautious optimists, the activist supporters, the supporters of heritage, and the proud Democrats. I just want to go back to my previous slide to the examples of the infographics, because here now you can already begin to see when we talk about the independent humanists or the uncritical loyalists or the celebrators of achievement, there are some very definite distinguishing features to each one of the groups. Like your celebrators of achievement, these are South African citizens who will always, there is not a question about it, they will always support our country's sport, science, any other form of achievement. Or when a South African wins Miss World all of us celebrate that, but this group in particular, if you want to mobilize stakeholders in South Africa who firmly believe that the nation's identity is expressed in the excellence of its achievements, then the Celebrators of Achievement is the group you want to be engaging with. Then your concerned citizens, they are very diverse in terms of race and culture, which is very important. It doesn't group into specific races or specific age groups even, but they identify with society. They feel that independence and the individual is more important than any affiliation with mass movements or larger groups. So what's interesting about the concerned citizens is they may be a bit more skeptical about society, but they're also much more individualistic. So we see a group of citizens in society. One wouldn't say that they are withdrawn from society, but ultimately, you know, they express their South African identity in a very different kind of a way. And then just one last example here, if you look at the uncritical loyalists, this is an interesting group in society where basically government institutions and political leadership are an accepted reality. Typically, they support and endorse the activities of the ruling party. They are accepting of the authority of the state. And that's another interesting feature of the uncritical loyalists, that beyond their, one would say, kind of accepting loyalty towards the government and political leadership, more importantly for them is structures of authority in society. So it's very important for an uncritical loyalist to understand what is my place in my traditional world, if I'm affiliated to a traditional leadership community, or my space in a province, or my space in the national authority frame of reference. So what I'm trying to say is we are still rolling out the series as the months come. We will end the year in March with a webinar. We will also share information with PRISA on that. So we are aiming to close off the series in March of 2021 with a webinar reflecting on the series, reflecting on what are the lessons that we've been taking so far through our engagement with these different behavior groups. Now, things that are not in the slides that I have here today, I didn't want to bore you, and I'm nearly done. I told the organizers they're being very generous with time, so hopefully I'm saving you some time on the program. I'm nearly wrapping up. Just a last comment, what we also have in terms of data on the behavior groups, and now I'm speaking as a communication person in the communication environment and to colleagues in the public relations environment. What this tool enables us to do, we can, for example, go to our provincial level data and we can see, okay, in Western Cape Province, we've got a predisposition towards the following behavior groups. And that gives us a certain kind of an insight on the province and on issues in the province, and also potentially a lead on strategically how do you engage with the province from a communication point of view or stakeholder engagement point of view. We can see in KwaZulu-Natal province, certain behavior groups are more prevalent in the province than in others, and similarly that would give us a lead then in terms of how do we understand the province, how do we understand the mindset of our citizens in that province. So ultimately this is a very robust tool that we've been developing over the years to really help us understand the national mindset, help us understand our role as an organization in relation to that society. And this is where I want to close off, and I think it's very important. The South African nation brand, the practice, the way in which that we've been building the construct of the nation brand. And as you can see through the presentation, how we try to monitor and understand the environment of this brand, it is inherently in the DNA of that brand sits the democratic ethos of the society. That is very, very important. If you look at the values that underpin the brand construct of the South African nation brand, the values of Ubuntu, or the values embedded in the preamble of the South African Constitution, I would really challenge you, colleagues, citizens, friends, go and read the preamble of the South African Constitution, because the preamble of the Constitution, in a way, also gives us the marching orders for the nation brand. Now, why do I raise that? I raise that because this research tool that we've been developing over the years is really trying to understand our society from a different point of view, asking different questions, and not assuming that we know everything about the society. I think we are way too quick to fall into traps of thinking. There are certain characteristics to our society. It becomes kind of cemented into our thinking. So this tool has really shifted our way of understanding our nation, because ultimately, and I think this is the final message, our behavior groups show that regardless of the painful race relations we have, regardless of the painful history we have, regardless of a lot of the inherent contradictions and sometimes even systemic contradictions in contemporary South Africa, regardless of that, we share much, much, much more in terms of values, attitudes, behaviors, etc., than we would oftentimes expect when we just engage with regular media debate. So, PRISA, our colleagues, I hope that shared a little bit of insight into the not just the brand is a world, but how we try to engage with the larger picture of the South African brand, and hopefully also a small contribution on how we try to monitor and ultimately also then evaluate the impact of our work. So thank you very much. I think I can pause there.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. I've seen several comments about people that say they cannot hear. I just hope this is not the case with a lot of you. Okay. As we said to you that this is a hybrid event. We do have attendance in person, and we are observing the social distancing, which is 1.5 meters or 6 feet. So we've heard from you, Dr. de Kock. Very, very sobering presentation you're making, and it certainly sits well with us as a professional body, and realizing that measuring the results of our communication goes beyond output, and it's about the impact of the communication efforts that we put in ensuring that we favorably position our organizations. Now we are going to open up for Q&A, but as okay, you are allowed to raise your hand. I'll see if I can see your hand. If not, you can just tell us your name and quickly pose a question. We're doing well in terms of time allocation for Dr. de Kock. So it is entirely up to the House to ask a question. If the delegates attending in person with laptops, all you need to do is just unmute and ask a question. It will be nice to see you as well. But if need be, you're also allowed to not switch on your picture, because sometimes it causes a drag on the line. Now, the doctor has warned us. It is said that forewarned is forearmed. Our profession is a noble one, but the things that come with it are quite serious. If we have to clean up the mess, it becomes very serious. Hence, we need to continuously measure and evaluate what we're doing. Right, the floor is open for questions and comments. Okay, we have Dr. Dalian, Professor Dalian, okay, who is going to
Open. Good morning. Thank you, Victor. And thank you, Dr. de Kock, for that very interesting information that you shared. I'm specifically interested in the comment that you made about active citizenship and the period between June and April and June, and the drop in active citizenship. What is interesting to me is that was exactly the time that, yes, we had the lockdown and we had the social distancing and so forth, but that was also the time that a lot of ordinary citizens came out and helped their fellow South Africans. So where do that kind of, where do we acknowledge that kind of behavior and actually celebrate that in our findings, so that we have a more, I think, balanced view of what South Africans are capable of if we link it to our normal reputation of that we hold within the communities around us, or internationally, that we are a very hospitable nation. And that we are caring. So where is that acknowledged specifically in terms of active citizenship?
Okay, it's quite a hefty question, but perhaps I would ask the doctor to respond to this.
No, Prof, a great question and very, very important. I think maybe also you must just indicate whether you hear me. I'm trying to get as close to my laptop as I can. um, in terms of the active citizenship, the slump in the trend, we do see before the pandemic already. And we've got a lot of data that we can cross-check some of these dynamics against. That definitely, as we saw the recessionary dynamics come into our economy, 2017-18, that active citizenship is weakening. And when you trace it back into some of the other responses, what one does see is a bit of a withdrawal. You know, it's not a lack of willingness. No, it's a withdrawal because of a perceived lack of time or resources. But to your point, yes, in the period where we saw the weakest time now in lockdown level 5 and 4, you're 100% correct that that is also the time when the business sector mobilized funds, the state mobilized funds, NPOs mobilized funds. You know, there was a whole lot of activity. So you're right, there was increased activity on certain fronts. However, that is acknowledged in the Brand SA world. We would acknowledge those kind of things through a lot of our Play Your Part initiative work. That is where we oftentimes go actively to recognize the work of specific people, NPOs, schools, corporates that are doing interesting, innovative stuff in their communities or their spaces. So you don't always see it in the data. So there's two answers. In terms of the bigger picture of the data at the national level, yes, we do see a withdrawal on the front of active citizenship. However, to your point, we do need to acknowledge that and reinforce the need for that kind of positive engagement by talking about the examples. And I often think we don't do enough of that. If I just think of randomly our universities in South Africa, if you think of a UJ, a University of Pretoria, a UCT, or even a Northwest University, in their communities, in their worlds, they also do sometimes some very fascinating stuff that goes completely unrecognized, you know, outside. So I think as a country, we need to learn more from ourselves to drive that needle of engagement, of positive citizen engagement in our reality, which is active citizenship. We really need to drive that up. And I think we're going to need more and more of that as we try to recover from the economic crisis that we are in.
Thank you so much. Well covered. Okay. Any other comment or question from the delegates, both attending in person and online? You can see me scrolling on the side. Okay. So Jana Strang has raised a hand. Over to you, Madam. Go ahead and ask your question. It will help us perhaps you also tell us who you are and which company, what organization you're from.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Victor. It's Jana Strang from Promote Communication in Durban. Thank you very much for, I must say, facilitating this. It's been a very interesting session so far. And I just wanted to pose a question, which was around the kind of findings. And it's been very interesting hearing how the collection of, the collection and basically segmentation of South African consumers has been done with Brand SA. But do you feel that there is a way that we could utilize this information from a marketing communications perspective to better understand the audience that we are obviously speaking to within the South African context? And if so, how do you think that sort of knowledge, especially from the data and information that you collected and shared with us, how can that be implemented?
Okay. A good question. Over to you, Doctor. Please take this one as well.
Sure, thanks. Also very relevant.
Okay, all right. Excuse me, Doctor, please, if you can, go into your video and go to your virtual background, remove that background, go take it to none, so that we can see you leke.
I'm not sure. Oh, wait, there is something. I didn't know. Oh, wait. I see.
On the video, there's a little arrow facing up. That's a.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was looking funny there. In terms of the question, how can it help? I think what to acknowledge firstly is that the segmentation we did is looking at an inclusive societal point of view, but I think more from a political, economic, societal lens. Now, when you do a segmentation for a brand or for a particular campaign or something, that segmentation would look slightly different, you know, because you are looking for a much more specific granular breakdown, say, for a communications targeting. So that's not a major point. Where this can help, where the segmentation that we did can help, it really gives you a broader, I would say, frame of reference to understand broader attitudes, values, and behaviors in the South African society. So it's not going to give you consumer insight. No, that it won't give you, because we're not going there. We don't need that kind of info. But from a values, attitudinal, broad behavioral patterning, you know, model that provides, I think, a background context for a deeper segmentation, for a brand, for a business, for a communication enterprise, it can definitely be a nice starting point. It's a starting point in the sense of it's a bigger backdrop screen of segments of behaviors in society that one can use as a starting point. So I would say it can be valuable, you know, just from the point of view of getting a bit of a different view on who we are as a society. And anyone interested, we're more than happy to engage, you know, and share a bit more detail what we have, you know, on what the groups look like, and so forth. And we're always happy to have those discussions.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. Let's see. Okay, we've got another hand. Madam, we're going to do exactly the same drill. It's just to introduce yourself and then ask a question.
Thanks, Victor, and thanks, Dr. de Kock, for a very insightful presentation, some very interesting findings and also some new challenges posed. So with regards to where we are as a society, the fact that we've got so many generations living together in one society, and post-COVID, and hopefully the vaccine is good news. How do you anticipate your ad spend as Brand SA moving forward? Because I saw a slide where, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but TV exposure and TV expenditure was quite high. And with a generation which doesn't watch TV, do it through various mediums, not being SABC 1, 2, and 3 going forward in the future with the internet, how does Brand SA anticipate their way forward in connecting with these citizens?
Wow, great one. Okay, over to you, Doc.
Exactly. That's the $1 million question, I think, for all of us in the communication world. I want to start my answer from a slightly different perspective. I would like to caution that in as much as we are living in an increasingly digitized world of devices, apps, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, we must always remember in the South African context, and I think in the developing world context in general, what we see reflected in the social media space, we must always remember that is but one reflection of reality. So the question of how you reach specific audiences, age groups, how you communicate with them is going to become increasingly complicated because the only answer is not just digital. As an organization, because of the nature of our work, your ad spend question, for example, honestly, we just cannot afford the high-scale TV stuff anymore. We do some of it. However, a lot of the AVs that you see that we bring out is part of a campaign, but then we leverage digital infrastructure basically for cost effectiveness and also for reach, you know, of specific kind of audiences. So for an investment message, we can leverage AV, digital infrastructure, social media platforms, and one can get a very long way with that. However, and here's my word of caution, In the South African environment, if you want to really communicate to South African society, and I'll give you a practical example, we also played a role as an organization in the broader government communication effort on the COVID pandemic in the last few months. And we made a point of going to community radio, community media platforms where, you know, in a specific rural facing province, a specific radio station is one of the best ways for you to get a message to your rural citizen. We cannot live in this world where we're just obsessed about digital. Yes, digital can give you a tremendous amount of solutions. It can give you a tremendous amount of reach. You can go viral on that, but we can never assume that as a developing society with massive socioeconomic challenges, we will be guilty if we assume we can only communicate with South Africans on digital platforms. We'll be making a huge mistake. So I think that's a very important point of caution, because the tension between the real world of embodied human beings living in specific places and the question of access to the digital sphere is not just going to be solved by questions of affordability. There's behavioral issues, there's attitudinal issues, and now we get to a next level of information warfare dynamics. You know, so yes, we can reach a lot of people, but I think there's more factors that will appear on the path of communicating with audiences in that way. So what do I anticipate in terms of what we will do as an organization, not just in terms of ad spend, but going forward? I think increasingly we will try to strike that balance as a national entity where we have to reach specific kind of segments of our society or communities. You have to go Soweto TV, regional radio, campus radio. We've been on campus radios stations across the country for specific reasons, for specific purposes, communication purposes. So I think that's one dimension we always have to keep in mind. And the last example that I want to show you, maybe also just how we innovate. We're hosting the South African Investment Conference next week, the President's major initiative for attracting investment into the country. Now, due to the COVID pandemic, it's completely scaled down, only about 150 participants on site in Sandton, but the rest of it is all digital. It's a digitally broadcast conference with interaction basically from around the world. Now, why am I raising that example? I think in our efforts to spend money, to get reach, to get our brands and our messages out there, we will probably have to become even more innovative, not just on the digital platforms, but I think in real world platforms if you really want to engage with people in a certain kind of a way. So those are just some thoughts on that question.
Thank you so much, Doctor. There's a lot of questions that are coming up addressing a whole lot of issues. Just one quick one from me. Your work and your research touches a lot on perceptions, and you mentioned that you had a sample of about 350 that you do a month. Okay, where is this sample drawn from? Is it just from local South Africans, or that does it include international South Africans who may have different perceptions about us as a country?
Quickly, yes, the monthly sample is 350 respondents. The service provider that we have, they run a big panel. So it's a panel research facility. I think in their panel, sorry, I'm talking under correction now. I think in their panel, they've got about 35,000 respondents in that pool. Of course, all kinds of rules apply. If you responded once, you are excluded for a period of, I think, about 3 months, that you cannot participate in the survey again. So, and it's focused on South African citizens. That's the sample of the online and mobile survey. By the way, can I just quickly illustrate something? We've seen something fascinating on that point of the digital platform versus the our national Omnibus survey. That is a physical face-to-face interview that's done in the homes of the respondents across the country. And then we have our online and mobile surveys that's executed on, of course, web and phone platforms. It's really interesting when you look at the difference in data between the responses from the online mobile versus your face-to-face interview engagement. That shows you a definite dynamic of how a certain income profile, type of person, and a certain kind of opinion shapes through your monthly online survey versus your real face-to-face interview with a very different sample. And that speaks to access to phone infrastructure, to laptops, to internet, to data, etc. So that kind of reinforces my point of earlier. As we monitor and evaluate, but also as we communicate and reach audiences, we must be painfully aware that over-reliance on digital is going to steer you in a direction, I think, that may be dangerous. You know, you really need to control for that real-world, tangible audience, and what's their opinion, and how do you speak with them ultimately.
Great. No, thank you so much. I'm still waiting to see who else is there. From time to time, I go check if there are any raised hands. I don't see any at the moment. We are also live on Facebook. Should there be somebody who wants to ask a question? All I've been seeing is just comments and likes, but that's not good enough. Well, it's good, but it would be nice if we also start interaction. Now, a follow-up on the sample, Doctor. During you spoke a lot about what you're doing during COVID-19, and PRISA embarked on a very interesting program, which we were seriously concerned about grassroots. That mama and that go-go and those young people in the darkest corners of the country or in the townships. I know you said you reached out to radio stations as well. Now, this takes us to the monitoring method. What sort of monitoring system or method do you use to see if really your sample that you've so eloquently presented, um, how do you run your monitoring? Do you do it yourself, or you've got a service provider that does it, and how is it then drawn?
Yeah, we've got, I think, also a bit of a layered methodology. One layer of that is an appointed, a more classic media monitoring company that does your big sweep. You know, they would monitor print, online, social media, and basically on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, we will get feedback reports on specific issues in the environment, specific occurrences,
Ask a question.
and we can dig quite deep into that data, you know, so that's kind of like a temperature check media monitoring at the high level. Another level, of course, is then your social media analytics, where one can go into all kinds of directions of digging into that data, of extracting sentiment, and so forth, all the way to a very granular kind of a level. So I think those would be two big methods we use. You know, more classic media monitoring, looking at media discourse themes, etc., and sentiment in there, very important. We've got kind of like a robot system, red, amber, green. You know, that gives us a picture of what are the hot topic issues, what are the positive drivers of this discourse, basically, and then your social media monitoring. I think also maybe implied in your question then, because you spoke about we would utilize radio, etc., etc. We would basically pick up then the public sentiment, you know, ultimately through our media monitoring. As industry colleagues would know, you know, as a country, we've been challenged with this whole nearly a collapse, you know, of the insight into your audience segmentation work. I know there's been, the cat has been among the pigeons there for a very long time in terms of actual listenership numbers to radio stations, etc. I think a lot of work needs to be done by the marketing, communications, public relations, even the research industry, to look at how do we get a better handle on, you know, your tracking of listeners for radio, viewers for TV, and increasingly, of course, your digital platforms, your Showmaxes and other kind of platforms that are opening. So that's also increasingly making our worlds more complicated, not just in terms of availability of platforms, but also potential spaces where one could advertise or communicate with audiences. It's like in-app communications, for example. You know, that's a whole domain of communication for very targeted messages that certain companies may need. So anyway, I'm not helping. You know, I'm just saying the animal, the communication animal, is getting more and more complex in a way.
Okay, speaking of an animal, okay, let's now okay, let's just pack that one. We have another question that has come through the chat, from Mongezi Mtati, who says, what are some of the effects, economic and investor relations, that are seen from negative outcomes seen in the survey? A very interesting question. You can also check it out on the chat, Dr. de Kock.
Just quickly repeat it for me. The impact of
what are some of the effects, okay, economic and investor relations, that are seen from negative outcomes seen in the survey?
I can't say I fully understand the question, how the negative effects is connected with outcomes of the survey. Maybe I can turn it around, and say what we do see in the survey, for example, our national survey, when we look at concerns we ask a lot of reputation facing questions. How do South Africans see specific areas of the strengths of the country in terms of our image? Top of the list, the strongest reputation driver for South Africans is our sporting achievements. The bottom of the list, the most negative driver of reputation of the country, is a combination of crime, corruption, and then government inefficiency. So at the top, there's sport, art, culture, a whole lot of very strong people-facing things, and at the end, it comes to things like the bottom end of it is government. So as I say, I'm not fully understanding the question, so I can just share what we see in terms of what South Africans see as factors that undermine our reputation or our image, and then factors that enhance it. A comment on the investor environment that I can make, maybe not in direct response to the question, but what we do in terms of the broader investor environment, we do, and that's something else we could share with the PRISA at some point, a tremendous amount of what we call nation brand performance monitoring, where we look at a huge amount of indicators from different instruments to understand competitiveness, reputation, soft power, positioning of the country in international environments, and how that is perceived. Currently, for example, next week we are launching a South African reputation survey as part of the investment conference. Also working with our missions abroad, DIRCO, our embassies and high commissions, launching a survey to get input from our international stakeholders on currently how are they seeing South Africa as a trading partner, investment destination. So we do a lot of work on that front as well to get feedback from international audiences on how they see the country from an investment point of view.
Okay, great. We just before I take a question from Professor Bianeke, Mongezi has a follow-up question. Again, a very interesting question, and he says, are there any trends in local sentiment that can be seen among rural versus urban respondents? Are there any trends in local sentiment that can be seen among rural versus urban respondents? Over to you, Doctor.
We can definitely we can definitely spot things like that. I think in the broader picture, what we do observe, I think in terms of lifestyle, in terms of the value, you would find that in some of the behavior groups that is very strongly to kind of an urban mindset, that some of the behavior groups are much more informed by a youthful urban demographic dynamic, whereas, we do see trends in more rural facing communities, maybe more culturally oriented, maybe less.
Oosh. Okay. Sorry. I think I accidentally muted. Yes. Okay. Okay. Sorry, Dr. de Kock. I think I was trying to mute the lady, and I accidentally muted you as well. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Carry on, sir.
Yeah.
All right.
No. Basically, just the long and short of the story is we definitely do see interesting differences between rural society versus more urban. And as I said, it's illustrated the best by, kind of a youthful, creative engagements in our metro environments as a country. And that's why I said, that really shows those are the places, if you want to innovate and if you want to do new stuff, look in our metros, because that's where the demographic is, that's where the energy is, and also some of the resources. And of course, in our rural environments, a lack of resources and a lack of access is oftentimes the determining features, of broader behavior and opinion.
Okay. Now, thank you so much. I'd like to hand over to Professor Bianeke. You can pose your question.
Thank you, Vic. Doctor, just as a follow-up to Mongesi's comment and question, I think it links to my earlier comment with regards to active citizenship and a more balanced research view, because I think the credibility, obviously, of your research is it's unquestionable, but it is the result of these research findings that obviously lands into the hands of, I would say, some of our your segmentation groups, such as the concerned citizen, which then just again proves that things aren't as great in our country that we would want it to be. And I think the indirect influence, and it would be very interesting to see what the effect is on the president's initiative that you are involved with. This, I think it was this week. How will the research that you've now published and the findings actually influence and have a direct influence on investor relations for obviously the money, but then also how are the sentiments of our communities, our rural communities, actually feeding into the principle of interconnectivity that we need to really expand on, because I think we so often, especially in measurement and evaluation, are siloed in our thinking, and we don't bring all these various strings together, and we don't see the unintended consequences necessarily of some of the findings, and how do we balance out the negative findings of the drop in active citizenship with this is what we are doing to counteract that and to work towards that. So I think in line with Mongesi's question about the influence of some of the negative findings on things like investor relations would be a very interesting balancing act. So how are you going to bring that to the public? Because I think apart from doing the research, you obviously also want to bring those balanced views out to the public.
Mm. Prof, I will give you a practical example. Actually, just last week, I shared with quite a comprehensive feedback somewhere.
Thank you. Sorry about
quite
that.
a comprehensive wherein a lot of these findings from this domestic research that we do are incorporated. And part of that process is we then go and we identify the issue, and we will go specifically to see who in government, who in business, who in the civil society environment do we need to link with, not just to have a discussion, but how do we intervene? So we have those kind of engagements internally, and then with specific stakeholders, whether it's a government department or the presidency, a business chamber, when we pick up issues in as far as it's possible for us through the research, in as far as it's possible for us, we then try to recommend and act on it. Oftentimes it wouldn't be Brand South Africa going to the pavement, to the public stage, making an intervention. More often than not, a lot of our work will be kind of behind the scenes, where we will go engage with the economic cluster in government, where we will share, and we have done this extensively in the past, where we will say, in the South African environment, currently we are seeing the following, these are some of the recommendations that we're making. But I think what you also important, the question that you have on investor relations, now there's one comment I can make. it's not so much what we see in the research that we have here, but what we know exists in the South African environment. Now, what we do know is that the South African political debate and the manner in which we call each other names, make paintings, the most insulting artworks of heads of state, the kind of stuff we do that generate a lot of heat in our public debate can have a decidedly negative impact on people who have not had an engagement with South Africa. And that's a very important distinction to make. What I'm trying to say is the following. It's not so much the research outcome, it's the manner in which we engage with our politics and our political discourse in South Africa that's important. And I'm going to give you another example. We talk about corruption in South Africa. We talk about Zondo Commission of Inquiry, etc., etc. But we must remember that there's two indicators. In the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index, there's an indicator on budget transparency, where South Africa ranks first out of 141 countries in the world for budget transparency. There's another index called the Open Budget Index, where South Africa ranks second out of 103 countries, meaning South Africa is one of the most transparent state systems on this planet. Did you know that? There are so-called advanced Western European countries that do not even come close to South Africa when it comes to our level of transparency. Now, why do I say that? I say that because that means that is why we have a Zondo Commission of Inquiry. So we have an extreme level of transparency, but then we need to handle the fact that we are going to have revelations of corruption in the public domain. So as communicators, as public relations engagers in the country, when we talk investor relations, when we talk corruption, when we talk how we debate about it, we must always remember that fundamental democratic principle of transparency is actively working in South Africa. Now we must get it to work for us. Otherwise, it's going to undermine us. And if we fall into the trap of then just believing we are this corrupt nation, we are making a huge mistake, because the democracy we created consciously post 1994 is a conscious construct of not just voting rights and human rights, but it's extreme transparency. And that is something that we can brag about as a country. We can be very proud of it. However, at the same time, we must take the lesson that then we need to be extremely ethical in our behavior. And that's not just state behavior. Let's be quite frank. The kind of revelations that's happened in this country of corporate boards, of wrongdoing in entities that encompasses billions of rands in public as well as in private sector enterprises, it tells us something about an ethical lesson we need to take as a society. We need to embrace our democracy. We need to understand we are extremely transparent, and then we need to act accordingly. You cannot then go and run and steal the cookies in the kitchen. That's not going to work, because you're going to be shown up for stealing the cookies ultimately. So it's a rough debate we need to have. But I think when we talk investor relations, if we talk information, if we talk debate in South Africa, we as South Africans with our tongues do sometimes the most damage to the country, because of our attitude and our opinion and our way in which we are predisposed towards negativity about ourselves. It's like a teenager looking in the mirror, there's one pimple on the face and the person thinks they are covered in boils. You know, I think that's something very important we need to wrap our
All
heads around.
right. Well said. Well said, Doctor. Okay. So I think we've done very well. We've done very well to get to where we're at right now. Ladies and gentlemen, it is obvious that monitoring and evaluation is a critical step in determining success of all our efforts that we put in. It be public relations, it be communication, it be marketing, all interventions and programs. You will be very proud to hear, Doctor, that PRISA is a member of a proudly South African. So what this presentation has done, and the further engagements that we're looking forward to, is to enforce that we remain a proudly South African country. But I'm going to give you some homework to take home with that in your next presentation. There's a new hoja that has just risen, racism in South Africa. And where do you place that in terms of looking at us as a country and where we're going? Now, this has been a very great morning, and we are going to take a comfort break. The time is 11:30. We'll just take about 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, we'll take about 5 minutes, leg stretch, bathroom, grab a cup of tea quickly, and we're back. So you don't have to sign off. If you do sign off, step down, come back on the same link, and we look forward to welcoming you back. Very good morning, and thank you so much. It's been a great honor and pleasure hosting you. Check you later in five minutes or so.
In the audience here? Any idea? $150 million. And why? Because just a day after Oprah tweeted that Weight Watchers' market share grew by $150 million. Seeing that she owns 10% of it, that tweet was worth $15 million to herself. Context again. Now, let's look at another tweet. If I can get my slide to move. Associated Press. 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. How much do you think this tweet was worth? It cost $140 billion because the stock markets got wiped out immediately. Except, do you remember the explosion in the White House? No, because it was Syrian hackers who took over AP's Twitter handle and obviously posted the fake tweet. So the markets recovered quite quickly. But this is the effect one tweet can have. It's not R2.50 or R5. It can be worth billions, or it can cost you billions, or it could have no impact. So it's all to do with the context. And I think it's because a lot of us from a communications perspective still take an SOS approach. Now, SOS is what my AMEC colleague, who is the head of British communications, Alex Aiken, calls sending out stuff. We send out stuff and then we want to know what it's worth afterwards. And that's not how measurement and evaluation works, unfortunately. So we need to become much more strategic. And I think let's go back to a definition of communications. It's a two-way process of reaching mutual understanding in which participants not only exchange information, news, ideas, and feelings, but also create and share meaning. This is something we need to keep in mind always. I know Professor Bianca, who is in the audience today, is also a big fan of Professor McNamara from Australia. A few years ago, he did research. He literally spoke to about 3,000 communicators across US, Australia, UK markets. And what he realized is that 95% of so-called communication by organizations is focused on speaking. Now, let me just take this to my home. If I spend 95% of my time speaking to my wife and only 5% listening, you think that's going to be a good relationship? And I think that is where we make a lot of communication. We keep on sending out stuff and we don't listen. So we need to listen a little bit more. I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, let me just check here. When you talk, you are only repeating something you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new. And I think there's the other old saying, that's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I think that is something we really need to keep in mind from a communication perspective, because we too focused on sending out stuff instead of really trying to build those kind of relationships. Now, as we've seen, measurements like AVEs, there's the ugliest stepsister, which is a personal favorite of mine, the PR value, which is 3 times or 5 times or 10 times, because editorial content is supposedly more reputable than advertising content, which I don't believe anyone and these days believe anymore if you look at all the fake news. So to try and put a stop to all these debates and try and get some direction for the industry, the original Barcelona Principles were declared in 2010. Now, it's called the Barcelona Principles because members from about 22 countries met in Barcelona, and then they came up with a set of 7 principles to become the main guideline for measurement. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the principles, some are not. We saw a update in 2015, and then about 2-3 months ago we did the 3rd update to the principles. So why are they important? It sets an overarching framework, it creates an alignment, and becomes the basis for measurement in evaluation programs. It is not a formula, it is a principle. And I think where a lot of people fall down when they look at the principles is they try and use all 7 principles all the time. Right? That's not always going to work, but you need to guide yourself around this. And like I said, and Victor has also alluded to this, this is supported by the biggest PR associations across the world and communications organizations. AMEC is really the specialized sort of measurement arm to all these organizations. So without further ado, let's go into the actual principles, and we'll start off. Just a quick note I want to make is that by the end of this month, if you go to the AMEC website, you can download the principles in up to 25 languages. We're busy with translations. Actually, AMEC is twisting my arm to do a Afrikaans translation, but I suspect only Solidariteit will ever use that one. So we'll see how that goes. But why a 3.0 version? I think particularly if you look at this here, and we'll use that magic word context again. Things have changed. COVID has changed the world, but it's not just COVID. Just before COVID, Black Lives Matter. There's the Me Too movement. So context all around the world has changed, and we need to start building those kind of things into not just what we do, but on how we measure it. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges, like I said, what we as an industry face is we still think of measurement as an afterthought. Actually, you should do measurement before the time, during the time, and after your campaigns. And once you start understanding that, it will become much more clearer and easier to do. I'm just struggling here again with changing slides. So like I said, I'm not going to read all these things for you. You can go and download it and have a look at it yourself. So what I've done is I'm looking at each principle, and then I try and show you a practical example of how that could look like. So in 2010, with the original Barcelona Principles, the first principle was importance of goal setting and measurement. We've now updated it to read setting measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communication planning, measurement, and evaluation. You cannot do measurement if you don't know what you need to measure, or if you don't have a goal. Think about a weight loss program. If you know what you weigh, and you know how much you need to lose, and you can put yourself in a specific time frame and a specific diet. If you need to pick up weight, your tactics are going to be different to when you need to lose weight. So that is where a goal setting becomes so critically important. And I think if there's one thing you take today from my session, is don't just send out stuff. Have a goal. What is it that you're trying to achieve? That is, for me, the biggest takeout, really, because we still see a massive lack of this, really, in the industry. And to create a buzz around my brand is not a goal. Unfortunately, a lot of people will still be, briefed like that. It needs to be smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. So let's look at typical objectives of a PR or communication plan. It is to attract new customers or improve profitability or brand promotion. or reputation and crisis management, or increased share of coverage versus your competitors, or internal communication. We forget a lot of the time how important internal communication is. There's global companies that got hundreds of thousands of employees, and you need to do some change management there. Very important part of your whole plan. So if my boss tells me I need to attract new customers and improve profitability, well, in a year from now, I've got one extra customer and we made 10 Rand more. So I've achieved my objective. And that is not really how you need to set a goal. So let's make these goals a little bit smarter. I've got 10 customers now, and in 6 months I want 12. So I've got a time and I know how much I need to increase it by. I need 5,000 downloads of my product brochure in 19 days. Or let's get more of our coverage into our top tier media. Or increase our employee product knowledge by 20% in 6 months. If you start looking at it like this, then it becomes much easier because you know where you are. You need to have a benchmark. We all start a campaign because there's a specific issue to address or a problem to address or something we want to change, be it from a sales perspective, be it to get people to stop smoking, etc., etc. So you need to have those very specific objectives in place. The original 2010 principle number 2 was measuring the effect on outcomes is preferred to measuring outputs. And today it reads, measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. Now, what is an output? I think a lot of people worry about that. And this is unfortunately where most of our measurement stops. We count clips. I had 100 articles mentioning the brand this month. So it's stuff like publicity volume. It's stuff like reach. Who did you reach? Where did you reach them? What is the kind of messages that you placed out there? What is your share of voice? What did you tweet? And you can even roll it over to event attendance, because I think a lot of the time people confuse media relations with public relations. Media relations is a subset, so we can't just always look at newspapers and magazines. There's stuff like events. So those are all outputs. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of us stop measuring. We had 100 clippings for this month. We had 10 people at our event.
What's that? Epoxy? What is it?
And then
No,
let's look at outcomes.
no more blue ones.
This is now moving from output. I've had 100 articles there. Okay.
What size was that? Medium?
So that would be stuff like awareness. We spoke about focus groups in Professor de Kock or Dr. de Kock's earlier session. Awareness. Are people more aware? Are they downloading more of your product brochures? Do we get more leads all of a sudden because of this campaign? Are people engaging with our contents? So those are typically outcomes. I think then impact is a much longer term kind of focus. You're not going to know what the impact is of your campaign immediately. This is going to take some time. So that you need to be very aware of. Is there increased reputation around your brand? Are you increasing sales? Are there cost savings? Are you retaining customers or even staff, if for that matter? If you have a high staff turnover, investigate it, because it costs a lot of money for an organization to replace staff. So these are all the longer terms kind of issues that you need to be aware of. But that is what eventually either resolves your first problem or not. Principle 3, the effects on business results can and should be measured where possible. That was back in 2010. And what we mean by this is, what is a business result? That's obviously stuff like financials. Yes, you can measure the impact on an organization's financials. We updated it in 2015 to organizational performance, because it's not just always financial results. It could be, like I said, employee retention, or many other kind of specific objectives. And this is where context comes in to play as well. Outcomes and impact should be identified for stakeholders, society, and the organization. So we need to be clear, there is a context in which we operate. And I mean, a very basic example could be, don't send out your media release today about your new insect killer when Mama Albertina Sisulu just died. And that's what the media is focusing on. This is an actual case which happened to me about 10 years ago. Why guys were wondering why they're not getting media coverage. So I said, well, but you look at the media today. They're not going to carry your story. The nice interview you did disappeared. I'm sorry, it's in the bin now. So yes, like I said, those kind of outcomes, as I touched earlier, there's the immediate kind of sort of outcomes. You have unique visitors to your website, which increased, but eventually want that to lead to extra sales, for instance. So the impact is not immediately visible. This principle is basically stayed the same, just with a little bit of wording, but it really means that you need to look at qualitative and quantitative analysis. Yes, do look at your clip counts, where's the media, who's working better with it, or your unique visitors or downloads of your app in this example. You do need to look at it, but also look at the more qualitative kind of stuff. What is the messaging that it's appearing? What is the sentiment around those kind of topics which you are interested in? That becomes critical. I mean, the reputational kind of pillars. In this example, we can see financials are looking very good, but there's very little about staff and workplace. Maybe you need, if that's your objective, to talk about your staff and workplace and how great it is to work there. Maybe you need to do a campaign for that. So you need to look at the quality of the kind of coverage you're getting. If that's, if you're looking at the media space, is it driving what you're trying to drive? And we'll go back when we get to the framework on how to align that. If your organization's goal is to sell your new credit card, don't let your communication be about your home loan, for instance. My favorite principle, this one's really not changed in all the years. AVEs are not the value of communication. Now, there are many reasons. I'm not even going to harp onto that. You can download in the material we'll send out. There's a great piece by Richard Bagnall, the 22 reasons why you need to say no to AVEs. But I'll just highlight one or two of them. I think the biggest problem with an AVE is it's an indication of cost. It's not an indication of value. There's a very big difference between the two. Warren Buffett said price is what you pay, value is what you get. So I think even calling an AVE advertising value equivalent is a misnomer because it's a cost equivalent. It's not a value equivalent. Now, the best way I can explain it, I may pay 20 Rand for a Dora the Explorer DVD for my 5-year-old kid, but I will get thousands of rands in value of peace and quiet because I did that. So you cannot always equate the cost. And like I showed you in my my tweet samples as well, it depends on the context. Just an interesting slide from AMEC research. Now, keep in mind, this is AMEC clients. This is not all clients across the world, but it's still representative of many thousands of brands and organizations. When the Barcelona Principles started in 2010, basically 80% of people still demanded AVEs. And if we look at last year's figures, this has dropped down to 13%. Once again, representative of AMEC clients, not all clients. So it means they're starting to see value in all the other kind of measurements which is available to them. And I think one of my favorite, because I keep on getting clients asking me, but why is my AVE so much less this year than last year? Well, unfortunately, that's going to happen. Let's look at this example from the Huisgenoot. A full page ad will cost you 97,000 Rand. Now, obviously, if you use AVE kind of methodologies, you had an article that would be worth 70,000 Rand. Now, as we know, a lot of iconic titles this year closed down due to COVID. Roy Rooser, People Magazine, House, Garden and Home. There's so many, which is a very sad state of affairs, or some of them only moved online. Now, if you compare a News 24 kind of rate card to a Huisgenoot one, 320 Rand for this banner ad, but it obviously depends on traffic and all of that. So suddenly you're looking at a 97,000 Rand cost versus a 320 Rand cost. So if you use those kind of measurements, everything moves to much cheaper mediums. Obviously, your values are going to disappear as well. Principle 6. Originally, social media can and should be measured. Remember, this was 2010. So social media was big and people weren't really quite sure what was happening. And the principles dictated, yes, it can and should be measured. And today, we've moved on from that. Holistic communication, measurement, and evaluation includes all relevant online and offline channels. So it's not just the media, like I mentioned earlier, event attendance, stuff like that. I mean, even, and you need to combine all this data sets to get a real insight. I think this is one of the biggest challenges I see, that people look at a specific media channel maybe in isolation, and they miss quite a big insights. If you look at, for those of you who's familiar with the PESO model, paid, earned, shared media, owned media, I'll quickly run through this because all of this is important in the media space. Earned media is our typical sending out a press release, to big media houses. Could be blogger relations. Shared is obviously more your social, where people share your content. You look at your own media. This is your own website, your own videos or podcasts, and we've seen a lot of increase in the usage of this. People don't need to go through a big mass media channel to speak to their audiences any longer. They can speak to them directly. So this has been growing quite phenomenally. And then obviously paid media, which is more your advertising side of things. Yes, if you sponsor a Facebook post or do a promoted tweet, you're paying for it. It's advertising. Let's not mince about it, but that's obviously become much bigger in recent years with social media. This is a case study of an actual report I did in the beginning of the year, about in March. This specific client only got social media monitoring and analysis from us, but I thought I'll have a look at their traditional media and what's happening in that space. Now you'll see here around the 18th, 19th of February this year, both their traditional media and their social conversations are spiking. Now you would think this is the same issue, but lo and behold, what they did was they had a great CSI campaign, and they actually donated millions of rands to certain organizations. So I would assume now, obviously, this is the amplification on social. No mention on social. They also launched a competition online that you could, if you swipe your card, you could win this and that. So the two were totally competing. So, I mean, why wouldn't you leverage the two of each other? But now you're looking at it in isolation, and I can probably tell you they've got a social agency on one hand and a traditional PR agency on the other hand, and never the twain shall meet. Now we end up with situations like this where there was serious competing brand messages out there at the same time. Just like a week later, it spiked again, traditional and social. None of it came from the brand, neither from their social or their traditional channels. It was a feel-good story about a hippo who rocked up at one of their outlets in St. Lucia. Now, this story went so viral, and even on traditional, I read the story on Egyptian and Algerian news sites. Now, and a lot of people on social were, chatting about this. The brand never interacted with this. This could have been a great opportunity for them, from a good news perspective, to do something interesting, and they just let it go by. And this is just in a space of 2 weeks, one brand, because you look at things in isolation. Then the final principle, transparency and replicability are paramount to sound measurement. We've updated it today. The communication, measurement, and evaluation are rooted in integrity and transparency to drive learning insights. The integrity issue is becoming very critical. There's fake news, there's disinformation, there's misinformation. Um, I am quite familiar with the work which the IPR and the US have been doing, because they've been doing the study for the last few years on fake news and all of that in the US. And it's amazing that obviously family and friends are the most trusted channels of information, but then local media. Mainstream media is way bottom of the list. So this was quite an interesting finding from their research. But I think even from a South African perspective, there is so many ethical issues and legal issues we need to look at. Cambridge Analytica, I think Dr. de Kock referred to Oxford Analytica. It's actually Cambridge Analytica a few years ago. Really made a lot of trouble for our kind of industry. And that led to many platforms like Facebook and Instagram, all of that totally closed their API. So a lot of data which was available or in the open domain previously has now suddenly under lock and key. Just a month ago, I had a client messaging us because apparently one of their employees said something on Facebook. So now, can we investigate this? And I said, no, we can't. Firstly, we cannot access it because of privacy issues. Secondly, I don't think it's going to be in your benefit. What do you want to do with this? You want to victimize the person, that's not going to work. Never mind just from a technical and an integrity kind of perspective. So there's a lot of these things happening. And with GDPR in Europe, POPI Act in South Africa, the privacy issues are becoming very critical across the world, and you need to be cognizant of it. One of my other favorites, copyright, particularly in South Africa, I think there's a lot of confusion about it. A lot of people don't believe they need to pay copyright. Believe me, we have to pay, as ORNICO, a lot of copyright all the time. Every time a client clicks on one of our articles, you have to pay. If 10 people click on that same article, you pay 10 times. And that is how it needs to work. We've got a lot of queries recently from clients. I mean, with News 24 going paywall. Now, just send me the paywall article quickly. Never mind that News 24 has made it impossible to copy that item. It's against the law, and I don't think a lot of people realize it. With our media, as we know, they've lost all their advertising income. That's why a lot of the titles have been closing down. So this is the only avenue for them still open, is to get subscriptions. It's not hugely expensive. And what happens is, and they know this and they are very cognizant about this, is that obviously big corporations, some of our big brands with thousands of employees in South Africa, utilize their content. So they don't want you to go and copy an article and then email it to 5,000 people if those 5,000 people should actually pay subscription fees. So you need to be aware of that. I recall seeing an article about 3 years ago with Dalro paying about, I think it was about 500 million rands worth of royalties over to the industry, artists and singers and all of that. Corporate South Africa was only responsible for 500,000 rand of those royalty fees. I mean, what's that? Not even 1%. So the reality is these guys are becoming way more cognizant of copyright, those kind of things. People think because they wrote the article and send it to the newspaper and the newspaper publishes it, it's still their content. No, it's not. It's now the publisher's content and they own it. People still try and share content on their Facebook pages from magazines, scans and all of that. You cannot do that without permission. You need to get that kind of permission. So it's all these kind of integrity issues And like I said, context from a Me Too perspective, from a Black Lives Matter perspective, from a COVID perspective, from a government perspective, all of that which we need to keep in mind. And I think the big learning from Principle 7 for me is that you need to learn from your measurement. That is the most important function. It's not to prove how awesome you are, because sometimes you're not going to be awesome, but learn from that so next time that you can be better. I'll just highlight a specific example from a study we did about 4 years ago. This particular brand was quite a big story. They managed to get 702 as a media partner, which is, I mean, obviously a great achievement. And they ran the event. But if we look at the analysis, if you look at broadcast, and this is based on the amount of facts which the client wanted to publish out there, the core messages, 702 did not even feature in the top 5 broadcast channels. There were 8 facts. If we look at CakeNet, average number of facts was 6. SOS3 was 5. Even AN7 was still around, was 3.7. Where's 702? If we then look at the traffic to the event page, you'll see that little bit of orange sliver there. That came from 702. So even though 702 had great coverage, what we found is that 702 was talking about themselves, not necessarily trying to push the client's messaging. So is this going to be a good relationship, or for the future? Either you change it, or you change your partner, which they eventually did. So this is the thing. I mean, you need to inform future strategy from your measurement. That's the most important part. What is the learnings that you take from here? So that was quite a mouthful from a principal perspective, but like I said, you can go and download it through the links and go investigate it a bit further. But one of the challenges, obviously from the principal perspective, was since the original establishment in 2010 was that, okay, this is great, these are nice principles, how do I use it? So what AMEC then did is to create the integrated evaluation framework. So this is online, it's an interactive framework. You can create your own account on there, keeping in mind all these tools and methodologies. All of it's free. There's no cost involved to it. And this sort of guides you through the process on how to create a best measurement and evaluation kind of program. And I think this quote from Philip Sheldrake really spoke to me. I couldn't understand why PR needed to stand apart from the dominant approach to performance alignment and management adopted by the majority of functions one might find in a typical organization. And it's really project management. I mean, project management has been around those kind of principles for 60 years, but for some reason, us in the PR and communication, advertising world always want to come up with our own stuff. So the framework takes a very much a project management approach. You need to have objectives firstly. What is the input you're going to you need for that plan? What is the activities? What is your outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and the eventual impact? And that's how the framework works. So if you log into the framework, you will find a lot of material there and resources, taxonomies, metrics, etc., etc. So I'm just showing the actual framework now for the following few slides. I've just taken screenshots of how a kind of program can look like. It's also important to note, if you have your objective here, you're not going to know what the impact is. So it's a process which you update and revisit and rework all the time. And this is where the framework guides you through it. So if we start by the very beginning, is we need to align our communications objectives to what the organizational objectives is. I think that's foremost the most critical part. If our organization's objective is to stop people smoking, then you need to focus your communication on stop people smoking. Don't talk about bicycle safety if that's the objective. And still, I think that's what a lot of us do. Once again, the SOS approach. So look at what your organization's objective is. Most organizations have those, kind of vision and mission. So how do you align what you do from a communications perspective with that? If you go into the framework, you'll see a lot of little information buttons. If you click those, it will give you further insight on what you need to do there. For instance, here it will also show you what is the kind of metrics or research that you need to take into consideration, like SMART objectives. What's the target KPIs? Do you have a budget? What kind of resources do you need? So in this case, what I've done is a case study for myself. I wanted to increase analysis sales for the financial 2018 by 30% and for the rest of our African operations. So what is our communication objectives? We need to create a new website to speak towards this. We need to create leads. We need to provide opportunities for visitors to experience the technologies, and obviously it needs to increase the sales. If we go to the second part of the framework, then it will ask you about target audiences. And this is something we also forget. I think Dr. De Kock spoke very much about those kind of audiences, and we need to know who we're speaking to. If we want to sell a funeral policy to people in old age homes in Rosebank, you're probably not going to do a Twitter campaign, but rather do something in the Rosebank Lani Gazette. It may not be good for your AVEs, but you'll reach your target audience. So it's important to keep that target audience in mind. And what is the kind of other inputs and strategy that we need to look at? Once again, you'll be guided by your info buttons, all the different steps you can take. So, I mean, in this case, let's target PR agencies in South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, and then also brands operating in these other markets. Now, I could do a few strategic inputs here. Now, I think that is one of the things I need to stress as well. People think measurement and evaluation costs a lot of money. It's a very expensive exercise, all this research. But it's not necessarily. From an AMEC perspective, we've seen some of our biggest growth areas from non-profit organizations, because this has helped them so much to improve their communication, and it's really not that expensive. A lot of the research that you think you need already exists. If you look at Stats SA, even from many South African bodies, there'll be a lot of research. So in this case, I looked at the Alexa ranking for our website. I checked where our visitors were coming from. 96% from South Africa. We had a bounce rate of 53%. We only had a lead conversion of about 4%. And okay, some of my more other inputs is I needed to ask the boss for 100,000 Rand for the new website. So these are all some of my strategic inputs. Now, one I want to specifically mention here is look at our visitors from South Africa, 96%. But I want to target Nigeria and Kenya visitors. So obviously one of my objectives would be to increase the traffic from those kind of countries. So we'll just get back to that a little bit later. We'll list our activities. This is what is it that we're going to do. We look at the PSO model again. Paid, earned, shared, and owned. So I got the brand shop to build us a website. So that's our own sort of media activity. It cost me 100,000 Rand. We will create all our own copy and graphic design. We'll send media releases to BizCom, Mark Lives, Media Update, Management Kenya, create a case study for the Nigerian market specifically on the banking industry. We create case studies for Kenya on the telecoms industry, and then promote those through paid Facebook kind of campaigns. We look at our Google Analytics, and we launch AdWords to drive traffic to our site, which is at a budget of 60,000 Rand for the year at 5,000 Rand a month. And then more real life kind of interactions that we visit clients and actually show them our new website and the capabilities. So this is an activity. This is what we're planning to do. When our outputs is what did we do? Okay, the guys actually finished the website. We sent our media releases and we had so many opportunities to see on BizCom. We have 500 click-throughs to the release. Mark Lives, 100 click-throughs to the release. Niger News was not published because PR, as we know, does not really exist in Nigeria from a media perspective. You need to pay the guys if they want to carry your story. They're not just going to carry it. Management Kenya did well. Our campaign's been running. We had our 20 monthly meetings. We had 350 downloads of our case study in Nigeria, and we had 200 downloads of our case study in Kenya. This is your outputs. This is what we've put out there. Now, the next two outtakes and outcomes can become a little bit complex. So for purposes of today, I would really just say look at outcomes, because outtakes and outcomes are really the same thing. Outtakes is the beginning of the process, and outcomes is a bit more down the process. But that tends to confuse a lot of people. So even from a AMEC perspective, we said if it's too complex for you, just look at the outcomes kind of perspective. Now, once again, I mean, the guidance is there on the platform. You know, what is your unique visitors? What's the views? What's the responses? Is there positive comments? Is there new subscribers for your newsletters, etc., etc. So you will find that your outtakes and your outcomes are very similar. Like I said, beginning of the process and then towards the end of the process. Now, several months after we've launched the website, I could see, okay, our lead generation increased by 100%. Our conversion of leads increased from 4% to 8%. And web traffic from SA now accounted for 80% versus the previous 96%. Nigeria traffic increased from 3 to 12, Kenya from 1 to 8. Our sales in the rest of Africa increased 42%, and for analysis increased 28%. So now it becomes quite easier to show the value of what you've done. And I think, you know, looking at the sales figures here, this is another important aspect of measurement. We don't exist in our own little space. We exist in an ecosystem. There are sales figures. There are IT guys that track certain things. There is your HR department that's got certain data. And we need to sort of harness all those kind of different data sources so that we can get a better picture. If your objective is to increase sales for the organization, but you don't have a view on the sales figures, you're never going to be able to prove your impact on that. So you need to build those kind of internal relations in your organization. And then finally, if we look at the impact, like I said, this is a much longer kind of process. If I send a article to the newspaper, I'm not going to have an impact tomorrow unless there's a major drama happening. If we look over at least a year or so of launching this campaign, let's look at what the organizational impacts was. We increased sales as per the organization objectives. We surpassed our targets in the rest of Africa, so we could actually hire more people. We showed increased visibility to prospective clients. Our net promoter score has improved. We now appointed an extra salesperson in Lagos. And the magic word for everyone, return on investment financial. Could I calculate that? Yes, even from my website. And how do we do that? Let's look. There's only one formula for return on investment. And this is an accounting kind of formula. And it's increased revenue or savings minus your investment divided by the investment. Now, there's two trains of thought in the communications measurement world is that obviously ROI should be focused on financial. But then there's also those non-financial ROIs that you can look at. Like if your objective is to stop smoking, that needs to be what you measure, which is not necessarily a financial value. Now in this case, I could check what my sales was. I spent 100,000 Rand on the website plus 60,000 Rand on Google campaigns plus 4,000 on my Facebook campaigns. And that total cost was 164,000. So I could check my actual sales, and if you use the formula, you see that you've got a return of 10 Rand for every 1 Rand you spend. Now that's a good return on investment. This is how we need to approach if we are looking and we need to provide financial figures. We need to sort of look at it from this kind of perspective, because this is much more accurate. It's not always going to be possible, and it's not always going to be your objective. So it depends all on what you need to achieve. So I would really urge all of you to go and play with the framework. Like I said, it's the framework itself is available in 22 languages with all the guidance material. If you want it in Russian, just click the Russian button. If you want it in Chinese, you can get it in Chinese. It's even in Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, Norwegian, Dutch, you name it. And we're constantly trying to work more on improving that. Another great tool which I would urge you to explore is one which was launched about 2 years ago called the Measurement Maturity Mapper. Now this is very much like I said, a diagnostic tool which uses really crowdsourcing. And what you can do is you can create an account there for you and complete a questionnaire. So it asks you questions about, do you track things monthly? Do you report on this? Do you look at Facebook, etc., etc.? And what it does at the end of the day, it will benchmark your own performance against a similar kind of organization. So if you're a standout enterprise or a massive organization, it can benchmark you against other similar kind of organizations. If you are a small PR agency, it will benchmark you against other small ones, and it will show you where you are in relation to the data collected from all the other people who's completed these questionnaires. But the great thing about this is even once you've completed it, it gives you automated kind of suggestions. So if you look at your reporting, this is what you can do to improve it. If you're looking at planning, some great tips here like use evaluation to set KPI benchmarks and impact. This is what you need to do to improve those kind of measurements. So it's great tools. It's all free. I would really urge you to go and play around with it. I think Victor was generous with my time as well, because I've got a lot of case studies and I was worried that I was going to get to all of them, but I think the more case studies we look at, the better, because that maybe makes it more real. Seeing that we had Brand SA as part of our group today as well, I thought I'd share Visit Britain's case study, which was shared with us about 2-3 months ago. And they're also an organization that had to change quite a bit and adapt their whole measurement journey. And Caitlin actually shared this with us. So I just took some slides from it, not all of it, but maybe just to show you, how you can start this journey. I think the big thing about measurement is that it's a journey. Some of us are way down the road, and others are just starting. And you need to sort of know where you are, and this is a great study from a beginner's perspective, I think, as well. So if we look at their global landscape, like how they identified it, they've got 22 major overseas markets. So there's government agencies involved for Visit Britain. There's obviously other tourism bodies like Visit Scotland. There's destination marketing organizations, like Visit Manchester, or very much specifically city-based. There's the airlines, there's global brands like the Premier League, and obviously media and influencers. So this is the kind of landscape they need to operate in. And when Caitlin started there, I think, this is the challenges they had. they were focusing totally on print and broadcast, and that's where they did most of their targeting. They had no process of dealing with any kind of influences, very broad targets, sending out stuff. You know, if I could get a spot on a radio station where I had the most listeners, you know, that's what we're going to do, chase those kind of targets. Reach and AVE, the vanity metrics were the main measures of success. So once again, I mean, it's not all of us that needs to change. Some of the biggest guys in the world are changing and needed to change. So this is certainly not a unique kind of challenge. And PR was a standalone channel, inconsistently integrated into the other channels. As we've seen with my case study before, there's a digital agency over there for the brand. Here's a PR agency, and they do their own thing, and a lot of the time it works against each other. So this is really where they sat at. And I think this is maybe not that different to what many of us may be familiar with in our own working environments. So they started from the top. Okay, what is the organization trying to achieve? Those goals. What is the goals that we need to help the organization achieve? So obviously it's to grow the value of tourism and also to drive the dispersal of tourism value across Britain, because they want all of Britain to do well, not just London. And then they wanted to show, you know, how do our PR activities align to these organizational goals, and what are the metrics that we're going to use to try and prove that we're doing this. So they've built their own little model, and I think that is also the great thing about the valid metrics framework model, is that you can adapt it to your own needs. You can adapt the models as long as you start with an objective and the eventual impact at the end of the day. And in their case, they look at goals and objectives, at specific metrics and KPIs. What's the data sources they need? What's the target audience? How do they deliver those activities? And eventually they can report on it. So the company objective was obviously to drive value, the organizational objective. So the PR objective becomes inspire or target consumers with reasons to come, stay longer, and spend more. So that is what you need to focus on from a PR objective, not just tell everyone how great Britain is. Another organizational objective, drive regional visits. We want to spread this across Britain. So showcase experiencing your target consumers live in regions they may not know. So maybe they don't know a specific reason. So here's a reason to go to that specific area in Britain. And another great PR objective, because people always think you can't directly link it to sales, is that you encourage consumers towards a place they can find out more and book. That was an important objective for them. People needed to book space in specific areas. So the main metrics, and this is what I said, it depends on your objectives. And this is the big thing. Like I said, if there's one thing I want to let you take out of this today is objectives. Set objectives and then measure the objectives or the metrics and that align to that objective. Otherwise, you're going to measure a lot of things which doesn't matter. I think because we can measure some stuff, we sometimes measure it, but that's not really relevant to anything that we're doing. That was an eye-opener for me about 2 years ago when one of Facebook's marketing gurus said, you know, there's an inherent bias in a lot of these platforms that we use, like Facebook, because it gives you likes and you can see likes, you immediately start measuring likes because that's the only thing it gives you. So now you start becoming, you know, just following that. In the meantime, that's maybe not important for your objective. So that's one of the things we need to be very careful of when we measure stuff, is our own biases, the societal biases, plus then our platform biases. We look at things through rose-tinted glasses. Because I work with my brand every day, this is the most important thing for me in the world. My little insect killer is all to me in my world. You know, I don't notice what's happening out there. So those biases we need to be very aware of. So yeah, they decided, you know, they need to drive awareness and consideration. So they look at stuff like circulations, impressions, engagement, sentiment, views, but then encourage them to find out more on book. So, okay, is there downloads? Is there web traffic? Is there specific promo codes? And that's an interesting thing for me as well, because people always think, you know, you can't determine where this traffic comes from. I'll use a stupid example. I'll send out a measurement month article on this community, and we'll send out one on our newsletter. But then my headline will be slightly different on each. So if someone responds on an email, they'll normally use that headline. So I can say, okay, this guy obviously saw it in the newsletter, or this guy saw it on this community. Something as stupid as that. The old promo code, message XZ1, to get a 10% discount. Now, if you use XZ1 on a billboard, XZ2 on Facebook, and XZ3 on radio, obviously you're going to be able to determine where your kind of traffic and awareness comes from. So it is not as complex as we always try and make it. So once they've established those kind of metrics which they use, they set their smart KPIs, and I think this is what I want to get to. So they've only got 4 main KPIs now, instead of things like AVEs or reach, or all of that. And I thought this is a very nice basic kind of way which will really have a big impact. So their main KPI is 90% of the coverage which they generate needs to be within their top target publications. Top tier media. I'm sure many of you are familiar with top tier media, and I personally think that is a very important kind of measurement, really. I want to speak to a specific audience, which is the media that speaks to them. It doesn't matter that I'm on all the other media, those are really important. So for them, they need to achieve 90% of their targeted publications. 50% of coverage to include a call to action. Now, once again, that's the message. Okay, I want this media to tell a specific message to my audience. I want you to book a hotel in this specific region. So what is the call to action then? You make it easy. Then 90% coverage contain a minimum of one of the Visit Britain key messages. I showed you the previous example. There were 8 core messages. The top broadcast guys at 6. The media partner didn't even feature. So similar kind of measurement, you know. And this is once again very important for me. You need to have your core message there. Otherwise, why are you communicating? And then important, 100% of coverage outputs need to align with the market targets for delivery of growth to each region. And this is quite an interesting one. It's to showcase the nation and nations and regions of Britain to build demand. Coverage targets are aligned to market strategy, and coverage is shared with strategic partners. And to showcase the job they're doing. They really want people to book at the end of the day. That is their final case. I mean, and even from a earned media coverage perspective, they've got their Visit Britain shop. So could they drive traffic to that to generate sales? Partner and channel consideration through booking. So which channels are more effective at driving bookings to specific regions? Increase obviously social followers on their own channels, and then also their own channels. How could they measure ROI on that? So this was really their evolution. They had broad targeting, looking at highest reach. Now it's very much based on best prospect customers, tiered media list, market dependent on customer segments. We spoke about segments earlier. Once again, very important. PR was a standalone, inconsistently integrated, and now it's fully aligned to inspire consumers and drive them towards own channels and to deliver return on investment through their partners, through B2B and all of those. Reach and AVEs were their main measures. Now they've got their 4 global KPIs to deliver against. And before, as they were just focusing really on print and broadcast because of the reach issues, they've now moved much more towards social and also those kind of influences which they've created activity for. Obviously, when COVID hit them earlier this year, they quickly had to adopt their strategies, you know, adapt their messaging, and a lot of what they did then was to really showcase, even though they had lockdowns, you know, specific areas, so that once people could move again, I mean, we know they've just gone into lockdown again, but people could travel after their first initial lockdowns to drive people towards those kind of early places. They knew they weren't going to do international travel as much as they did, so here was a great opportunity for them to drive the Brits to different areas in Great Britain, not just international tourists. So just an interesting take from Britain. I think another British case study which I love, and this was an award winner, is a organization called the National Trust. Now the National Trust is a organization that looks after the coastline of Great Britain. So, you know, if there's erosion or all of that. But I mean, you can imagine they didn't get much kind of coverage or much awareness. The Sea Rescue Institute kind of guys sort of dominated that space. So they really had to come up with a sort of campaign to get them top of mind again. And what they did was actually quite astounding. They made this video. I'm not going to play you the video now because it's quite long actually. But about how they asked Britons to give them reasons why they love their coast. Now, what they did with their original research was actually very clever. And I think this is also applicable to us. Now, normally you could send out, we need money to save our coasts because they're being eroded away, and it would fall on deaf ears. But once again, they identified a little bit of a human truth. And they got this through just doing a little bit of research, nothing expensive. I mean, these guys don't have money. But they realized if they speak to people about the coast and they don't mention the erosion, the first thing people mention is their memories of when they were little and they used to go to the coast. I'm sure all of us have similar kind of memories. And they realized that this was a very warm kind of emotional experience for people, you know, thinking about these kind of messages. So they built their whole campaign about this, and they targeted families with kids between 5 and 11. And they got the poet laureate of the UK to start a poem. But he only did the first 2 or 3 lines of the poem. And then people across the country had to contribute another 2 lines. And so they kept on building this whole poem and what the coast means for them. Now, important thing to keep in mind about this specific campaign. This was not a fundraiser campaign. This was a campaign to make people aware that yes, the National Trust is going to launch their fundraiser campaign within the next 6 months or so. This is just to prime them. I mean, they had little walks, they had a shell sphere tour where they put shells and stuff in the cities. So really not an expensive kind of campaign. And let's look at some of the outputs they did there. So they did a lot of videos with John Cooper Clarke, who was the poet laureate, and some spokespeople. They did those tours. There was news photography and features on coastal walks. And then eventually the big day, they made a social film featuring John Cooper Clarke and people across Britain like reading this final poem. And this is a good example of how it looks in the framework as well, I think. This is directly from the framework. So yeah, there's your outputs. They got 361 pieces of coverage, 82% key message delivery, 25% higher than what they normally would get, 18,000 contributions to the poem, 84% retention rate on YouTube, 5.5 million views of the campaign. And some of the incredible figures they started seeing is that 32% of the target audience reported considering membership, 27% donation, and 24% volunteering to help them look after the country's coastlines. They were also one of the top 3 storytelling brands in 2015. And I mean, they also had pieces of coverage here which drove traffic directly, which they could track. Now, the eventual impact of this campaign, like I said, keeping in mind this is not a fundraising campaign. They actually got 400,000 pounds donated to them because of this campaign, even before the fundraising started. It contributed to a 23% year-on-year increase in their membership, and now they've set a lot of benchmarks for future kind of interaction. And I think that is a great thing. Is like we said, you need a goal, but you need to know where you are at this stage. If you don't know where you are, it's going to be very difficult to reach your goal and know what success looks like. One of my favorite, and this is a very short case study, is one which was in China a few years back, of all places. Interestingly enough, I mean, the PR industry in China is quite young. It's only about 20-25 years. And because it was so new, they maybe not bogged down with some of the old learnings that we from a more traditional perspective get stuck down. And I think that is the biggest issue from a measurement perspective, from our perspective, is that we need to unlearn a lot of things. They didn't have this challenge. They didn't need to unlearn previous practices. Now, I mean, if we just go look at the landscape in China in 2016, look at all their different social channels. We've got Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And I can promise you this is much bigger than this now, but this is a specific point in time. And what they've done is their ecosystem, and I'm not the only one talking about this, this is quite general knowledge. The way they've built it is that you can buy directly from your Twitter or their Twitter equivalent, you know, from Alibaba on your bank accounts connected to it, and then it gets delivered to you. So their ecosystem is very much geared towards this. What happened was Mr. At Bags was quite an influencer on WeChat. And he kept on talking about all these beautiful ladies' bags. And I mean, the guy had quite a big follower base. And Gavinci noticed this, and they started tracking his audience profile against their target profile. And they realized that the two were very much aligned. So this is obviously a great influencer for them to approach. Now, they didn't go and pay Mr. At Bags a fortune to promote their brand. What they actually did was create a custom bag specifically for him, a range, which he could then make available through his platform, and only through his platform. I don't particularly like the baby pink Mr. Bags, but that's what they did. And they created 80 bags custom, and you could only get it on his channel. And when they launched it, they sold all 80 bags within 12 minutes and generated 175,000 US dollars. How's that for a campaign? 12 minutes and you've made a revenue of $175,000. They didn't pay him, but they created this custom bag which only he could at the end of the day sell. Now, isn't that a great campaign? And that is how easy it can be to put direct correlation of your campaign to income. Instead of trying to multiply the value of a tweet, which would not never come close to the 175,000 US dollars in hard cash. And then I want to share a final case study with you, which is much closer to home. So I'm talking out of the bedroom here. Please don't tell my boss. For many years, we've partnered with the Financial Mail and ran a quarterly event called Ad Forum. Now, this has been running for 10 years. Jeremy Maggs used to be our presenter back in the day. We looked at particular ads from a particular industry, for instance, telecoms for the previous 4 months. We did a little bit of research about it, showcased the ads, and then there would be a panel of industry experts discussing the ads, and eventually people would vote about it. And most of the time, everyone slated all the ads because they weren't very creative necessarily. So this was really what we did with this campaign. Now, eventually, as the media houses changed, we started getting a lot of value or supposed value for this, and they gave us ads on in the Business Day, in the Financial Mail, in the Sowetan. They really, came to the party from that kind of perspective. Also, web banners on sites like Times Live, Sowetan, all of that. My problem with this is I look at these sites all the day and I didn't even notice the event. Maybe it's in the bottom corner or so. And because I'm close to the event, I would keep an eye out. So if I didn't notice it, how many other people maybe didn't notice it? So we started looking at this. I mean, they even had articles for us in the Financial Mail, in the actual print edition, beautiful articles, all of that happening. So a lot of media coverage. They certainly came to the party from that perspective. And then I started doing a little bit of a different measurement here. So our annual sponsorship was about 120,000 Rand for the sponsorship. When we started off, we had 5 events, and as the years grew longer, the amount of events we got offered got less. So obviously we needed to keep this in mind. And then I also calculated the kind of cost of my team members, how much time they spend on creating this research or compiling all of this for the event. So I could calculate this. The actual hard cash was about 120,000 Rand, and the other incidental cost was about 80,000 Rand. Now, make no mistake, the 80,000 Rand is also a hard cost. I pay people for their time. So roughly 200,000 Rand for the year. So we looked at 2018 to 2019, and we did similar kind of events that you're looking at: financial services, telecoms, automotive. Those were probably the most popular ones. And yes, financial services actually grew year on year. That's attendees at the event. But then looking at telecoms, that dropped quite a bit, and even automotive dropped quite a bit. So in total, our attendance went from 270 to 230 people in a year. So very easy measurement, because we know how many people come to the event. I know what it cost me, and I could now also check. Obviously, telecoms and automotive is not doing as well as financial services. So I can do a few more measurements here. I could compare it to the year before, the 2 years. What was the cost? And then I could also calculate a cost per thousand, which is a typical marketing kind of calculation. How much does it cost you to reach 1,000 people? And then I could calculate my cost per 1,000 people, and then you extrapolate it to one person. It costs us 666 Rand to have a person attend one event. Well, that is expensive. And in 2019, this went up to 870 Rand per person. And our best value obviously was financial services, because there were way more people. And worst event was really telecoms. So this was our second year of poor telecoms. So we know, okay, we're not going to even bother with telecoms. We'll need to do something else the next year. Now, I wanted to illustrate as well, from just a broader marketing perspective, just visiting the cost per thousand again. If you look at the generations, and I did this about a year ago, to have an ad flighted when Generations was on SABC, and this alludes back to what Dr. De Kock said earlier as well. we get so sidetracked because Twitter, and now it's TikTok, because there's TikTok, we all need to be on it. Not that I'm discounting it, but you need to know why you're going to be on there. Things like SABC One, don't ever underestimate the power of these channels. They're massive. SABC One's got way more viewers than all the channels on DSTV combined. People ask me why their AVE figures are so small when they're on E-News on DSTV. And then I said, because it's got 500 viewers. You know, that's the reality. People sometimes really, because they watch it, they think everyone else watches it. If you go and actually look at viewership figures, go and do the research, you'll be surprised. Some of these channels which you think are so massively influential, they've got very little viewership. And this is where something like SABC One in particular is such a powerful medium, you know. So yes, it would cost you 200,000 Rand to fly one ad once during generations. It's not production cost of the ad. That's to flight the ad for 30 seconds. So, but you've got 8.4 million viewers watching. So it costs you 2 cents to reach each of those individuals. So that's a very good cost per individual person. Now compare that to my event cost, 870 Rand versus 2 cents. But now I need to consider as well, okay, it cost me 2 cents to reach someone on SABC One, but that's not my target audience. I'd rather spend the 870 Rand to reach a relevant kind of person. And that is where you need to start making decisions. Yes, SABC One is a very attractive kind of medium, but is my audience there? You know, it's very cool for me to be on SABC One, but is my audience there? And we need to keep those things in mind. Now I could also track who attended those events, and I can see which of those ended up maybe doing a deal with us. I mean, that's the reality why I sponsor the event, is that I want to get business from it, money. So let's look at this case scenario. So agency A, they subscribe to our services for 15,000 Rand a month for a year, 180,000 Rand. Agency B for 20,000 Rand, and Agency C did a once-off research project with us. So I could see my sales I generated, which I could link directly to people and connections and relationship we built through the sponsorship, came in at 670,000 Rand, and it cost me 200,000 Rand. So I can once again do my return on investment calculation, and I can calculate for every Rand I spent on this event, I made R2.35 or a 235% return on investment, which is once again a great investment. But now we look at the other scenario, which I think we need to keep in mind as well. Maybe the reality is I only got one client signing up for 2,000 Rand a month. And if I do the calculation then, for every Rand I spent, I physically lost 88 cents. I made a negative return on investment. And I think there's some people, particularly in the communication or PR world, that says every effort is worthwhile. No, sometimes it's not. Not every investment works. Look at Steinhoff's graphs here. 96 Rand and it dropped to like 150. If you bought up there, you are crying today. So not every investment is great. Another thing I can say about Steinhoff, they had probably some of the best AVE figures of any big brand in South Africa in recent time, and not in a good way. So I also had the AVE figures for our events, 550,000 Rand. Does that equate to any valuable information? No, not really, because I could see what my real return on investment was. But yeah, those are some case studies. We're running out of time. I think I would just like to remind you, yes, a lot of this may look very complex to you. Start playing with it. don't immediately drop your AVEs if you are an AVE believer, but start looking at other metrics, core messages, top tier media, and build your journey all this way and add a little bit more every single time, and you'll start seeing what kind of great insights you get from these kind of research, and it's a journey. Like I said, I am a little bit down this journey. I've got a long way to go, and I'm sure a lot of you will only be starting this journey now. But what is not disputed is that we all need to go onto this journey. Otherwise, we're going to face irrelevance in the near future. And I think we need to show that kind of value. We need to grow that strategic insights we give to our organization, and really become part and parcel of the fabric of the organization. This is critical. Communication is everything. Like we said earlier, look at the US elections. It's communication. And don't ever underestimate the power of it. With that, thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a long session. I can certainly speak for another 5 hours around this, but I don't think that you would like to listen to that. So I'll hand over to Victor for now. Thank you very much.
Right, let's give Francois a big round of applause. Thank you so much. You did very well. You did very well. Right. Now, this is what we're going to do. Okay. What's happening right now? Okay. Let me stop the slide. You'll pardon Francois. He came across very soft. He is soft-spoken. But we tried adjusting the microphone and putting it in different ways so that you can hear him. Okay, there have been a number of comments made, and Liz Haywood, I would do recognize you. Jana Stang, we do recognize you. Yes, there was an issue raised about sound that we need to improve it. Okay, and then there was also a concern raised or a question or a request about where can you get the recording. Yes, it will be downloaded. The good news is that last night we managed to work hard and created a PRISA YouTube account. Now, PRISA has a YouTube account which was created last night. All the content of all the events we've had will be posted on the YouTube. But in terms of the content for this particular presentation, it will first go out to the PRISA registered members ASAP. We'll send this through our emailer for all the paid up members. For the rest of you who are associates and friends, you will have to wait until we've downloaded the material into the YouTube channel. So it pays to become a member of a professional body. Thank you so much, Francois. Quite insightful. I know we've put you under pressure to condense a full day's presentation into 2 hours, and you did very well. You scored about 15 minutes time there. Now, I needed to also make everybody comfortable as to what is AMEC. AMEC is the International Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. Okay, right now, already we've got questions that have been raised by the online delegates, and this is what we're going to request that we do. Because this is a hybrid event, we've got guests in attendance in person. Perhaps we should just run through, don't take a break. Let's run through so that we release all of you that are connected via via Zoom. Okay. I would like to go to a few comments online before I open up for Q&A. Just give priority to these questions. And this is one of it from Tessia. Tessia says, from AMEC's perspective, have you ever found that in-house communication practitioners measure and evaluate to really learn from the data that agencies do? Okay, we're going to allow you to now take a seat, Mr. Van Dijk, and respond to these questions comfortably. You've been standing for almost 2 hours. Okay, over to Mr. Van Dijk.
Hi, Tasha. I hope you can hear me. A very interesting question, and I do think if we look at the AMEC membership, it started off as more from an evaluation perspective and evaluation kind of companies, but there's very much an agency membership these days as well. There's a lot of brands direct, organizations direct that's joined, and it's quite big organizations. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank, all of those also make members, plus agencies. I think my personal experiences of an in-house, it depends very much really on the individuals. I think it depends on what kind of agency you're looking at. Obviously, what an agency does, you know, a lot of the time I find obviously measurement is a grudge cost for them. It's a grudge exercise. You know, they don't want to look bad, so they're scared of measuring. And I think that is what maybe from an in-house perspective, sometimes the in-house guys do want to learn a bit more. You know, they're not trying to impress a client, for instance. So those are kind of things we need to keep in mind, but it's, you know, I cannot generalize on that. You get brilliant PR agencies that's doing a great work and taking those kind of learnings to heart, but then there's others that really just ignore it. But I think generally brands, and particularly, like I said earlier, our not-for-profit base has grown immensely. And that should tell us something. You know, it's not always to do with the big budgets and all of that. So these guys really want to learn. They need to do a lot with little budgets. So they probably take it a bit more to heart than most. Okay. That's right. Output and outcome. Once again, it depends on what those particular ones are. You know, for me, if I send out a tweet, you know, that's an obvious output. Because it may have reached 1 million people, that does not mean that it's an outcome for me. You know, the reality is probably very few people saw it. So the engagement of that is more of the outcome side, and that's what you need to look at. I think, you know, particularly in the South African space where I've seen, you know, everyone will use black coffee as an influencer to sell, from coffee to takkies to holidays, whatever, you know, because he's got a massive reach. But the reality is a influencer does not need to have 1 million followers. If he maybe tweets something, one person engages on that, I mean, it's negligible. Whereas someone who's got 10 followers and all 10 are really important decision makers, that's going to be a much bigger issue. So really what you need to look at from an output perspective is, this is the stuff we put out there. Outcome is what happens because we put this kind of stuff out there. Is there you know, any kind of action? So even audience reach figures, those kind of things are all an output. It's not an outcome. It's what happens because you put it out there. And please don't ask me too difficult questions. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, I'm still a student. Influences. You know, how do we measure influences? Okay, this is What did Dudu Mieni say at the State Capture Commission? I don't want to implicate myself. Um, so I'm going to purely give my own opinion, and this is maybe a controversial opinion. This is not an AMEC opinion or ORNICO opinion or a PRISA opinion. This is just mine. I think influencers are just a buzzword. I've done research for brands recently where they had some campaigns on Instagram, and one of the funny things they did is they did live Instagram chats. But as soon as the chat was done, it disappeared. They didn't save it, nothing, so the content is gone. And when I looked at the sort of engagement from that specific influencer versus some of the traditional channels which they partnered with versus the actual brand, there was way more engagement with the brands and the traditional media side. So I would be careful with influencers, and I think the issue starts with what is an influencer more than anything else. Um, but I think if you look at the Mr. Baggs case study I showed you, if you approach it, correctly, um, there's great ways of doing it. In their case, let's look at sales, and how quickly we could sell those sales. So it depends. But if the objective is very nebulous, and I think this is not just for influencers, this is for any kind of campaign through any media. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, if you don't have a goal, you're going to struggle to measure it. If you want Mr. Bags to sell 80 bags in 15 minutes and he does it in 12, then you know you did very well. And I think that's, whether it's an influencer or not, you need to know and put those specific metrics in place. Don't just choose an influencer because he reaches 1 million people, because those guys don't want to hear your message necessarily. I think, very thank you for that question. That is one of the biggest things I'm very passionate about. And I'm glad to have Professor Bieneke here as well from UJ, because, I've worked with her for some time. Like I said, it's easier to learn best practices from the beginning rather than to unlearn poor practices, which a lot of us has become used to. So the whole education issue is critically important. That's why I try and work with Professor Bieneke at UJ. I've given talks there, but that's only the beginning. What I didn't necessarily mention from an AMEC perspective, that is AMEC's main objective, is education, and not just for young people, for everyone. We've got the AMEC college, and I've got that link which will be shared with you, where you do quite a hectic academic course for several months, which is quite intensive to learn about measurement. I will be honest, from a South African perspective at least, it is costly for us. They charge in pounds, and hence, from an AMEC perspective, what we've also been doing, besides being on the board, I also work with the education committee of AMEC, and we've been developing a introduction course, which will be much better priced. That will make it affordable for us in South Africa to easily kind of attend this kind of introductory courses. And it's really a like I said, from an organization perspective, it's educational. That's our main mission. If you look at some of the international PR associations, some of them are starting to make moves to ban AVEs, to sanction members that keep on insisting using it. That is not the AMEC objective. You know, we don't support banning it, but we believe the educational perspective to help you see better solutions around that is the way to go. And that's why I say, I know for people who's only ever used AVEs, it's very scary to jump into this new world, and that's why I say keep it, but start introducing those kind of new measurements and play around with it. There's not really a wrong or a right way. Like I said, the framework guides you, the principles guide you. You can adapt, you know, the framework to your needs. Whether you are a individual or a massive organization, it will work for you. But education is critical. And like I said, that is one of our core focus areas. We will be launching the new introduction course probably towards the beginning of next year. We're hoping to have it ready for you know, measurement month this year, but our academic committee also gave their input, and we'll do some minor changes to just to make it easier. You know, the academics make it difficult for the rest of us sometimes. Sorry, punch not given. Any other questions, comments? You can ask your question, just unmute.
Manel, yeah, Lipoto, just unmute yourself and ask the question.
We're actually making good timing, yeah? Okay.
Okay, we've got, okay, Natalie. Okay, Clarissa, over to you, madam. Ask a question.
Thanks, Vic, and thanks, Francois. I think I get extremely excited when I see the move away from very hard measurement tools. And do I understand you right if you say AMEC and most of us need to emphasize branded impact rather than traditional media modeling, which goes on reach and frequency? And I think you've mentioned the word context and relevancy, and I'm very happy when I hear what you say about influences. But when we look at that, we still have to go back and look at the campaigns that you mentioned on Love the Coast and the and we just look at the context and the relevancy of that, and the fact that they looked at branded impact rather than reach and frequency and time, and look at the result or the outcome that they had. With that in mind, do you think we are going to have or come to a point where we can actually measure the branded impact on social platforms? And sorry, social, not just being Twitter, etc., but being the @bags and being the Love the Coast campaign, etc.
I think, you know, this is one of the challenges we face, is that with the media landscape becoming much more fragmented, there's going to be more challenges, make no mistake. But like what I also try and say, the underlying facts, the underlying theory, the principles remain the same. Diplomacy, public relations, you know, before it was really called public relations, goes back thousands of years. It's still about building relationships, etc., etc. So I think that is what we need to focus our, you know, everything on, is those basic principles. Those don't change. The channels might change. The lights and whistles and the bells may change. And we get sometimes distracted by that. And we want to be on platforms where we don't necessarily need to be there. That's one of my favorite cartoons. I didn't have it in this one. I've got it in my 6-hour version for PRISA, where the guy walks into the boardroom and says, wow, 10 people liked my post. And it's the board that's 10 people and all of them put up their hands and they liked it, you know. Um, so, so that's the first thing. Principles, doesn't matter how technology changes and how many channels suddenly appear, the principles will remain the same. People tell me, yeah, but this kind of stuff will never work in South Africa because we've got a different kind of context in South Africa. No, it's the same everywhere in the world. You know, you fool yourself when you think about those things. Yes, the top parts may look a little bit different, but it's all basically the same. The fundamental stays the same. So make no mistake, it's going to be difficult if there's a bigger proliferation and all of that. I think we need to keep in mind as well, and this is my personal opinion again, is that I just look at my own Facebook page these days. I was one of the first guys on Facebook in South Africa many years ago. It wasn't even in the media here. No one had ever heard of it, but I had a friend overseas who sent it to me. And I used to love Facebook. If I open my Facebook now, I've got a brand message jumping out at me. 20 of them for every post from a friend of mine. People get annoyed with this. And I think this is where brands have maybe overstepped the mark, is that people are going to start switching off from these kind of things. Not to discount the power, obviously, of it, but we need to keep in mind what is social media. It's supposed to be social. I don't want to hear all your stories from a brand perspective. You know, I want to see what my friends are up to. But once again, from a measurement perspective, like I said, the most critical thing for me is you need to know what your goal is, and you need to know exactly what success looks like for you. If you know that, then measurement becomes much easier. If you don't know what success looks like, then it becomes very difficult. And I think that is, for me, the fundamental. And unfortunately, I still see a lot of practitioners sending out stuff and not having a specific goal. And the whole planning aspect of this is critical. There's another AMEC resource which you'll get on the AMEC website, which is the planning tool, which is a total guidance of how you should go about and plan your campaign. You know, like I said, measurement happens before, during, and after, and that is critical. But a good starting point for me is have a goal and know what it looks like, because then you can measure it. Then you can determine what kind of metrics you need to look at. If I want 10 people to buy travel insurance or funeral insurance, it doesn't matter that I reach 10 billion people, but I can't sell anything, you know. So you need to keep in mind, I'd rather reach 10 people and sell 10 products.
Okay, thank you so much, Francois. We have a question from Natalie. May I request that this be the last question, because we've just exceeded our time by a few minutes. We've been doing very well. Natalie, over to you. Natalie van Black.
Hi, sorry, I don't have a question, Victor.
We saw you had a hand up. Okay, thanks. A comment then? Seeing that you're the last one. Say something, Natalie. All right.
Sure, thank you. I was worried about another difficult question. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you found it insightful. Like I said, it's a big elephant to eat, but start by taking some little bites. And like I said, we'll share a lot of these resources A lot of us across the world do this as a labor of love, and it's really to improve the professionalism of what we do as an industry and make our lives easier at the end of the day. So yeah, thank you very much again to Victor and PRISA and the team and Brand SA and you, Jay, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you very much.
Sanitizing microphones and moving around and doing things. Thanks so much, sir. Now we are going to be discussing the same topic but taking a different approach, which is the most important approach, the foundation of measurement and evaluation. And this will be by none other than Professori Dalian Rene Bianeke, the PRISA past president. This is a person that needs no introduction. She's been in the space, she's been on our face, she's been in our lives, and the partnership that we have with the University of Johannesburg is an amazing one. Okay, so she will be the one that is taking us through measurement and evaluation, but mostly from the academic perspective. Certainly, as she goes through the presentation, she will also touch perhaps on some of the topics that were raised by both Dr. Petrus de Kock and Mr. Francois van Dijk. I've got the names right. Okay, yeah, the day has been going very well. Okay, so we're just setting up quickly to get the presentation, and thank you so much so far for being around, and we've seen very valuable comments and questions that we picked up here. And just for the comfort of everyone else, the presentation will be made available to you in full. You must just visit PRISA YouTube perhaps later tonight or tomorrow, because it's going to take some time to upload. So you are not going to miss anything. Even for your notes, should be able to pick that up. Okay, Madam President, let's see. We have given you the share rights, and we're ready and good to go. Yes. Okay. You can just click on the. There we go. Is your mic on? Is it the mic?
Mute.
There we go.
Technology. Good afternoon, everyone. This has been a very amazing session with lots of information. I think we have a feedback. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you to both Dr. de Kock and Francois, obviously, for the amazing presentations and the information that they shared with us. To me, some of the key concepts that they actually raised, and it started with Dr. de Kock this morning with his comment around mindfulness and communication effectiveness and the multi-layered approach. Related for me to the interconnectivity that we have and that we should be looking at, that it's far removed from just, as we had in the past, a siloed. And I think some of the comments that we've seen from Francois looked at how siloed the approach is that we sometimes fall victim of. So we need to, I think, readdress our thinking when it comes to evaluation. And I want to really stretch the point of us looking at evaluation and measurement as one of the aspects of evaluation. But just before we started this morning, Francois and I had a long discussion around the planning to evaluate. It's, having a few measurement tools within the context will give us the data that we look for, but it's the mindset of evaluating why it is that we are doing something, why are we doing it with the audience or with the stakeholders that we've identified, etc. Constantly having that mindset of critical evaluation and critical thinking. So in summary, then to what we know at this stage about measurement and evaluation, or evaluation and measurement. And this comes from a study that Tertia Landsberg shared with us last year, her PhD study. And it said there that the practitioners, you know, the higher the qualification and research knowledge, the higher the use of qualitative evaluation. And practitioners are using process evaluation to keep their finger on the pulse. Now, what I would like Tertia, perhaps if she's still with us later on, to just add, if she would, if that process evaluation was similar to, or can it be related to, you know, agility, which is the concept that I would like to present this afternoon. Would it link to agility and the continuous evaluation of not only the process, but also then of the key objectives, as Francois has alerted us to. So that was a finding that that Tertia had in her studies. She also, though, found that only 43% of her participants that now stretched and were mostly senior practitioners use the Barcelona Principles. You know, they stated that they are not familiar. So 43% of the participants were not familiar with Barcelona, and therefore they most likely would not use it. Now, this is supported and also links to what Boomen and his colleagues who wrote a brilliant article in 2017, which states that evaluation lacks a broader evaluation framework, which looks at behavioral change. Now, we've heard a lot about statistics this morning. We heard about from Dr. de Kock on how Brand SA does brilliant work in giving us data as to how our South African citizens can now be segmented differently from the terrible, and I'm sorry to put it out there, but I am very emotive when it comes to LSMs. But, you know, how can we actually think about our citizens in South Africa as different or group them and segment them, also a terrible word, into different groups of people that we want to speak to. So, but what we didn't hear is how much of the behavioral change have we actually achieved with the question of why are we doing things? Yes, we can say this is what we've reached, and this is the target that we've, you know, that we've met, and the communication goals have been set. But are they necessarily talking to the behavioral change? And how do we measure that behavioral change? Just by the number of sales? And do we know, as Francois said, what are the sales figures of after following a campaign? It's like Mr. Bags with the pink handbag, that's direct. But how many of us can actually say that? So it needs to be incorporated into mainstream practice, which links then to the mindset that we spoke about earlier on, the different way of thinking about evaluation from the start, from planning start. I'm just going to briefly mention these findings that Boomen also linked to what their research comes up with or came up with. And one of the things that I want to highlight is that we often get as professionals so bogged down with presenting figures and stats and prove the value of communication that we forget about the counseling role that we have to play in our organizations. And that counseling role is to find out who exactly and what is the best way to do things. And for that, we need insight, and we get the insights from the data. The question that I often have is how far do we take that insight into our decision making? I would want to say that we need to work on some of these issues. Then the big point or idea that I want to leave us with this afternoon. And we are finishing off earlier because I do think it's been a very productive session. The thought that I would like you all and all of us to think of is how do we apply agility? And agility is a revolutionary, disruptive approach in any way. But even more so, how do we apply it to evaluation and measurement? And what Patika van Roele said in her article, and you can see it's a very recent article, she says that agility teaches that what works is more important than what was the agreed plan. Now, that in itself is a very disruptive statement, because we've been talking all day about how important it is to know where we are going, and that we have set plans available as to what it is that we want to achieve. Now, the question here is, or the statement here is, what works? And how do we know that it works? Or are we forcing things to work because we have this goal to reach, this objective to achieve, and not always asking qualitative questions, but rather just quantitative, rather just the numbers. And I think that's where we get to the AVE dilemma that we are sitting with. It's much easier to just do a few calculations and then have AVE figure to prove our value, which I think is very sad if we reduce our value to an incorrect formula to start off with, and not have the answers as to what is the real influence that we as communicators have in society, not just in our organizations, but in society. So agility, therefore, urges us from a dominance and moves us away from a dominance of formative, goal-free evaluation. Now, that's completely opposite to what Francois said earlier on, where we had to have very specific goals. Agility asks us to have a continuous approach to evaluating things as a form of growth and flexibility, and have goal-free evaluation. Now, you know, that's the beauty of being a difficult academic, as Francois was saying. We have the luxury of putting the cat amongst the pigeons and see what happens, and not necessarily always have the answers. But I do think we need to, and that's why I wanted to put the cat amongst the pigeons, is to for us to think critically as to why is it that 43% of tertiary Landsberg respondents or participants didn't know about Barcelona. Is it just bad marketing and PR from AMEC, or Barcelona for that matter, or from Global Alliance? Or is it that there's a resistance towards how and the framework and the criteria? Do we know why people are not taking up the suggestions, and which seems so logical and seems so, you know, non-issue? But why is it not happening? Why are we not using it? Is it perhaps that it doesn't always fit the context, the complexities, and speak to the complexities of what we are trying to achieve? So a final slide, and it's really a wrap up of an amazing thought-provoking morning, is to ask the question, so if we want to investigate agility in evaluation and measurement, what are some of the suggestions? Now, this is based on Van Roele's article, and that will be shared with our presentation as well. For those of you that would like to read these academic articles, and I would like to urge you to expose yourself to that once in a while. There are two methodologies or two approaches that she proposed. One is action research, and it's also a very unfamiliar territory for us in South Africa specifically when it comes to research. In our, in South Africa, we see a lot more quantitative research for public relations and normal, our run-of-the-mill campaigns and so forth, and not so much action research, because action research makes the stakeholder your co-researcher and involves the researcher or the stakeholders in the process of research and not just as a participant or a respondent. So it's a cyclical or spiral process that, as you can see there on the slide, deals with 4 phases: planning, action, reflection, I prefer, and conceptualization. So it's this constant cycle of involvement, trying to understand why people are doing the things that they are. And the same question applies for us in public relations and from the professional body point of view. How do we understand the behavior or non-acceptance and implementation of AVEs? Or sorry, not AVEs, we're very good with AVEs, but of the Barcelona Principles. That was a Freudian slip. But, rather have the easy way out than trying to truly understand and make meaning, which is the second one, sense making. And that was coined by Derwin in 2003 already, that it's an idea of the human being not just being a person, sorry, and my thoughts are going back to the statements that Dr. de Kock made this morning of we are far more than the things that we own. And I always say to my students, by somebody walking in Sandton or driving a fancy car, whatever they like at that stage, a BMW, or I see more Mercedes going around at the moment, does not make you a rich person. You may have a lot more debt than somebody staying in another area. And that's why I have a personal resistance to being put into a box or segmented, because of the things that I use as a brand to associate with. We are far more than the things that we own. So the approach with a sense-making methodology is that the idea that the human is a body, mind, heart, and spirit living in a time-space, moving from the past into the present to the future, anchored in material conditions, is really, to me, vast in terms of trying to put our minds around that and trying then to evaluate, am I speaking to the body, mind, and heart of somebody that I am interested in, or is it really just a one-sided preoccupation with what can you do for me in terms of selling or buying my product, my brand, supporting my service, being a good customer? What is it that we are trying to achieve in public relations? Are we cold-hearted? Then I can venture onto things like brand, Bell Pottinger and so on. Do we want the message to be that type of message? Or are there other stories that we can ask and let people tell their own stories in their own context and not dumb down their influence or our influence that we have on society? So that's just a few thoughts from me, and then wrapping up some of the key, as Francois said, outtakes or takeouts. I never know, is it the takeout that I'm getting or is it an outtake? But some of the key thoughts from this morning as to we need to think interconnectivity, we need to think context, we need to know what it is that drives our decisions, use our insights, and being mindful about what it is that we want to achieve with our communication. So just a few thoughts from me. Thank you, Vic.
Okay. Big round of applause for Madam President.
Thank you.
I think I'll be doing injustice if I try to summarize this, because Madam President has just wrapped it up nicely. So We have also ended an hour in our day session. Instead of finishing at 3, we'll finish at 2. But I must say that the quality of the presentations, as well as the academic approach rendered to us by Madam President, is something that we really need to think strong about. You know, the real purpose of this exercise is for us to learn what are the best practices. And I'm certain that this session has provided us with the skills and approach needed to measure performance, as well as the platform to discuss, review, and assess what we're doing on the day-to-day basis.
My goodness, I've said so much. Oh my goodness, my apology. I was on mute and I've said so much already. Only the people that are attending in person will now get a to get a repeat of what I've just said. Thank you so much, Madam President, especially for your input or your presentation on the academic side of things, because that is where we have to start training and bring in new talent. And for all the new practitioners coming on board into the profession, they've got a huge challenge. I think when the doctor started earlier on, she said the public relations has got a huge challenge. So we must be warned. It's true that forewarned is forearmed. But what also came up very interesting was that Mr. De Kock spoke about integrity against that backdrop of being warned. So if we all practice with good integrity as practitioners, then we'll be doing the right things for our clients and for our organizations as well. So it's not only about us communicating. A best and a take home today is that we also need to listen. And through listening, that's where we're able to then apply the proper tools to measure what we're doing and evaluate the impact thereof. We've heard about the very rocky relationship between the public relations and the media, which we need to nurture and add more value on it, because the AVE story and what we're doing, sad to say that some clients still want the AVE reporting. And yet it's a thing of the past. But then as a consultant or as a service provider, what do you do? But the challenge for us as practitioners, we need to move into that space and assist our clients, train them, and in terms of AVE, because Francois said AVE is cost equivalent. So you must look at that and look at the best practices. So for us this afternoon, it's been quite a very interesting morning into an early afternoon. And thanks, Madam President, for recommending that we don't take lunch. Instead, we complete the session to allow people at home and in the office to carry on with their day-to-day work. So this platform, or this webinar in particular, has provided us with the skills and the approach that we need to measure performance, as well as look at the platforms to discuss and review, and as well as assess what we do on the day-to-day basis. So a very special word of thanks to all of you from PRISA, and we did get the president earlier on who opened the webinar. I thought this was the last webinar we're having, but it looks like we've got another one coming up next week, talking about something extremely important and interesting, which is going to add value to the members. We will start communicating this afternoon. This is about how you measure, how you work, how you do all sort of things. I don't want to spoil the communique, and we didn't want to confuse you with a lot of communique in while we're busy talking about the measurement and evaluation workshop. So with this said, ladies and gentlemen, we're certain that the session has also reviewed the best practice and shared both the global and the local standards of practice. From PRISA to you, all PRISA members, I said they are privy. They will get the links and the presentation by tonight via the emailer, and everyone else, associates, friends, colleagues, will then get that uploaded onto the PRISA YouTube. Please visit PRISA YouTube. All the previous events we've had, including the global, the research colloquium and the global ethics day we had in partnership with Brand South Africa, has also been uploaded to the PRISA YouTube channel. So we've got a lot to really celebrate as we draw closer to the end of the year. Special thanks to Brand SA, Mayor Pumeza Ceza, you're always on our side. Yeah, and we're really looking forward to engaging. I've noted much next year. Please, don't forget us. And to all the members, we'll hold you onto it. We want to hear what are the new developments and what is happening in that space. So on behalf of PRISA, the board, the staff, thanks to all the members. I know some of you might just say, "No, why leave so early?" Unfortunately, we've got other things to attend to. It's been a great pleasure. We look forward to engaging you, and keep in touch. And thank you so much. And may the good Almighty bless and keep you until we meet again online. Toodles. Bye. So,